Hey folks, welcome back to the Utah County Republican Party podcast. I'm here with Cristy, and we are talking to Rob Axson. And you may or may not, we're releasing them at the same time, have seen an interview with Phil Lyman that we did online. So watch both of the videos. Just to give a little bit of context for this recording, we've already done this once and I messed up the recording. So it's my fault, but if it seems... I made sure not to push that button on there this time. But anyway, so if it feels like we're talking and we talk like we've already hashed this out, it's because we already hashed this out. The other thing I want to just put in here, and I said this on the recording with Phil as well, because I don't know which one you're watching first, but I approach this as a kind of a state delegate, right? So, vice chair of the Utah County Republican Party, it matters to me, but in reality, what we do is we sit down with our candidates, right? And so I come and I say, Rob, I have a question. And then Rob answers the question. And so all the meet and greets that we do during the election years, we're just doing that same kind of thing here. And so if I say something that sounds favorable to Rob, it's because I like what he did. It's not an endorsement. And if I ask him a hard question because I want an answer to it, it's not going against him and endorsing his opponent. And so, that's what we do. We vet these candidates, we ask them the hard questions, we kind of get a picture of what they're about, we kind of get an idea of what they want the state party to be. And so just watch these videos with that in mind. And then what I'm also hoping is I've talked to people, a lot of folks are really concerned about this race. And so I've talked to people that are dead set against Rob. I've talked to people that are dead set against Phil. I've talked to people that haven't made up their minds. I've talked to people that are going, what, chair race? Oh, I have a thing in May. And so for all those people, right, what I'm hoping is that if you've already got an opinion, I'm not necessarily looking to change your opinion, but you have to realize that somebody's going to win and everybody else is not going to win. And so what I'm hoping is that we can see where things are headed with whoever gets elected, and then we can work together to make the right things happen. So keep an open mind about Phil, keep an open mind about Rob, and let's just ask some questions and see where this goes. All right.
Hey, love it. And Chuck, thanks again for putting this on and letting us come into your home with all of your talents to do this. And Cristy, it's always good to be with you. And delegates, all of you, I echo what Chuck said. Listen to this, ask the hard questions when you're meeting with me, ask the hard questions when you're meeting with Phil. And I want to say at the onset, Republicans are better when we're unified. And it doesn't mean we have to agree. It doesn't mean that our styles or our priorities or even our opinions on a specific issue is going to be the same. But we need to remember who we're against. And so I don't want this race to be against an individual. I don't want it to be against Phil. I consider Phil a friend. There's a lot of things I agree with Phil on. So I'd encourage all of us as delegates, let's look to build the party and make it strong and viable for years and decades to come. You engage in the decision process as delegates. You guys get to make that decision, but let's do it in a way where we keep in mind who really is the enemy, and the enemy is outside the party. The forces outside of the party, that's what we need to be focused on. Let's not, overly divide within the party.
Yeah,
I agree.
I would say, we agree on more things than we disagree. And I think everybody knows it's been a little disheartening to watch people who agree on so much find smaller things and then make mountains out of molehills. So I agree, and I think we can talk about the future of the party in a good, respectful way. And so we had a great call with Phil. We had a previous great recording with you, and I'm sure we will with this one as well. So
yep, absolutely. I guess I should also point out that I'm going to try not to make comparisons between Rob and Phil. Rob's welcome to do that, but I just want to ask questions. So the first question is, and I think this is the one that everybody expects, then I'll get into some of the hard questions. I am asking the hard questions, so stick around. But just to start out with, like, what is your vision for the party? Like, where are we headed? Where are we at? Where do you want to take things over the next 2 years?
Yeah, I think the core thing is to remember what's the purpose of a political party. You go back to our country's founding. Our founding was based off of principles, right? It was based off of ideas. It was based off of this expression of God-given rights, not rights from a king, not rights from the aristocracy, but rights that were inherent to you as being a child of God.
Mm-hmm.
That's what our country's founding was. Political parties became an apparatus that was built thereafter. And obviously they existed before in parliament and things, but political parties are there to express something different. And so I think it's important for us to remember like the core things that are true, regardless of the Republican Party: faith, family, freedom, liberty, individual responsibility, rights, stewardship, community. These are things that are true in the Republican Party. And hey, occasionally even the Democrats can get it right. More so in the past than nowadays, but occasionally they're right in some other parties as well. Flipping it, the political parties, though, where I see them as being strongest is when they are a vehicle for good and a force multiplier to support those principles. And that's why I'm a Republican. The Republican Party is the political party in our country right now that is supporting those: faith, family, freedom, liberty, community, stewardship, all of those things that we're talking about, responsibility, all of that, the political party that we are all members of is fighting for it. So my vision for the Republican Party is one where we are continually growing and strengthening that we are finding and promoting ideas, and we are finding and promoting candidates who believe in that, and policies that support those principles. That's what the political party has to be. And so the more that the Republican Party is a facilitator and an instigator of bringing people into the cause, supporting their expression of political thought, and then electing the candidates who represent us, that's the purpose of our party. Very pleased with what we've been able to do over the last 2 years and for many years here in Utah, but you can't rest on the laurels. You have to keep building.
Right.
You need the party to continue to be more and more influential. One other thing that I'd put on top of that I think is an important expression that we somewhat uniquely in this country have here in Utah is our caucus convention system. That there's no system that I'm aware of anywhere in the country that is as closely tied to like the foundational spirit of the constitutional republic than this idea of neighborhoods and communities coming together and finding people to represent them. And then those people going through and doing the hard work and taking it back to their community. Like that delegate relationship, it's the very heart of a constitutional republic, which is what we are. We're not a democracy, right? We have elements of democratic expression that come through a republic. That's what we are.
Yep, absolutely. So how far down this road do you think we can get in 2 years?
I think you can make a lot of progress, but keep in mind the biggest thing in any type of effort when you're trying to grow influence and momentum is really the urgency, and the influence that you have comes from the consistency. You have to be consistent on it. Like political efforts and political parties, they ebb and flow, right? Sometimes you have relevance, sometimes you don't. Sometimes you have money, sometimes you don't. Sometimes you have good candidates, sometimes you don't. The more that you can kind of flatten that pendulum swing while keeping the trajectory of growth, of momentum, and of influence, that's what you need to be shooting for. That's what I've always been focusing on. And sometimes along the way, you realize, wow, we look at the progress, like that directional progress that we've made. And sometimes it feels like, oh man, like, are we getting anywhere? But you keep the pressure on. It's when we let up and when we take the foot off the gas that you then fall back into that ebb and flow cycle. I don't want us to have that. Let's keep pushing. Let's keep that flatlined. And you can get these moments where you have the exponential growth, but you have to keep that consistency. So you can't take the eye off the prize. And there's a lot of ways that you have to do that. I think this is one of the things I'd encourage delegates to think about. In the role of a chair, there's 20 different things that a chair needs to be helping keeping the party, the grassroots, the candidates, the state central committee, a number of different interests focus on, 10 to 20 different things. And you can be phenomenal in one, but if you failed in the other 9 or 20, then that's a difficult situation that you find yourself in as the party. And so you can't just be looking for one home run and then striking out every other time. You got to figure out ways to get hits and to get on bases, and then you score the runs by being consistent through multiple innings.
Yep.
I like baseball. It's baseball season. Baseball just started. So, there's a baseball analogy that kind of makes sense.
No,
Yep.
I so relate with that, because not with baseball, but with that, just understanding that I was saying this to somebody the other day, that I had no idea how many things, different areas and subjects that I would have to be proficient in. And like the growth that I've had over the last 2 years of just skills that I've had to gain, because it's wild, all the things, the different hats you have to wear for different things. So it's almost like it's almost like a PR person, and you have to write well, and you have to speak well, and you have to bring people together, and you have to, be a leader. I mean, it's so many things when you really get into it that was probably, I remember specifically like maybe the second week that I realized how deficient I was in certain areas, and how much growth, like, oh wow, I've got to really get up to speed in some of these areas. And then just like what a mixed bag it was.
Yeah.
That blew my mind of like, oh, because normally like when you're hiring for a corporation or something, you find something that's really people who are really good at just those one things. This is literally like across the board, skills. And it's quite a challenge as an individual. So I total side note from sympathy and commiseration, for all those things that a chair has to do.
So true. And I know you have this here in Utah County because I've seen a lot of it. I certainly have this on the statewide effort, but there are so many good, talented Utahns.
Yeah.
That just like all of us care deeply. And so that's been something that's been pretty special. And the more that we kind of link into people's experiences, their talents, their priorities in ways that are like tied to the party, that's where I've been able to see a ton of growth for me personally, but also success for the party, because they fill in the gaps that I don't have, or that you might not have, but suddenly it's like, hey, look what we can do together as a team. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's fun to see people come out of the woodwork and say, I want to help you with this. They don't want to say like, hey, I noticed that was garbage on that thing you produce. But it's kind of fun for them to be like, hey, I want to contribute my skills to this cause that we all feel deeply about.
And we need more of that. So like, again, to delegates, step up. If you've got ideas, figure out in your county party how you can be helpful in your precinct at the state level.
Yeah.
There's a lot of ways that more input is actually going to be beneficial for your party.
We have legitimate experts out there that, we need them.
Yeah.
All right. So one other thing I'm just going to point out, and this is just one of my own foibles, is I hate it when people look at their phone while they're podcasting, but this is where my questions are. And so I will try and keep it put away, but I'm going to look at it and then I'm going to make sure I ask all the questions. So let's get into one of the, I guess, more contentious issues, or one of the areas that I hear about a lot. And it's essentially SB 54, the signature path, right? And, I'll be honest, I'm going to ask two questions at once. The questions are essentially, what do you plan to do about it? And number two is, a lot of people are really concerned that you haven't done a lot about it, or haven't done enough about it. And so can you address, I guess, both of those in whatever order you want?
Yeah, sure. So SB 54, for any delegates that might not be familiar with it, obviously, I think most of you are, but some might kind of be new to the process. SB 54 was passed into law about a decade ago. And we've had a number of election cycles that have fallen under kind of that process, which it took away from the party process of nominating our candidates and deciding who it was to represent the party. Prior to SB 54, you just had one path to the primary ballot, and you even had an opportunity to forego the primary if you earned enough support from our delegates. Phenomenal system. It provided wonderful feedback, collaboration, accountability, wonderful system. SB 54 created a separate path to the ballot. And so this separate path, it's signatures. So you can kind of ignore the process, or you can do both. You can engage with delegates, but also go and get your signatures. I mean, I've been on the record for 15 plus years. I'm a big believer in the caucus convention system. I think that accessibility to the process is something that we should not quickly or easily throw away. And I think we should fight for and guard jealously, because again, that accountability, that collaboration, that feedback mechanism between a candidate and the people that they're wanting to earn their vote, and then ultimately an elected official and the people from whom they earned their vote. That's so invaluable. So we have to have it. So then we found ourselves as a state in this situation where you have that, and as a party where you're forced to abide by state election law. Like, party process can't trump law. Like, ultimately, we've got within our party constitution, That's then followed by our party bylaws. Then you might have special rules, and then kind of practices and the culture that you build around your entity. But all of that is trumped by state law, and state law, where appropriate, is trumped by federal law. So you have to abide by state law. We're now encumbered by this state law process. So again, it took us many years to get to a place where SB 54 was passed. SB 54 to now, we're decade plus. You're in this place where you have to play the long game to push back on this. And it's not that you can't fight the fights and seize the opportunities when they come that are immediate. You absolutely should be doing that. But if your goal is to just like, hey, let's swing for the fences one time and then like see what happens, that's not going to cut it. You have to have a long-term vision and plan and energy to try to get back to where we were pre-SB 54. So you have two ways that we can solve this issue. And then I'll talk a little bit about what I've tried to do to both and what my ongoing efforts would be to this. You can either litigate or you can legislate. So litigating is to go through the courts and to try to get the courts to recognize where our rights and where our constitutional right of assembly and right of association and freedom of speech and everything else, where they're infringed, and hope that the courts will side with us. And that hasn't played out in our favor.
Right.
We have failed in that regard. And
twice, right?
Twice from the party front, and then various candidates. And yeah, certainly there's been some candidates that have weighed in on that in the last year, and it hasn't been successful.
Okay.
And so litigating, like right now, we're banging our head against the wall. And so I don't think you take the foot off the gas there and just say, oh, we're never going to look at that. But you have to be pragmatic. If you're not getting anywhere on the litigating front, and if at the same time you're tarnishing the brand and you're dividing the party and you're bankrupting the party, is that the best use of our opportunity right now? Not only to do all the good that a party has to do and fight for the things that matter to Utahns, but also to repeal SB 54 or get back to this place where our convention delegate process is fully empowered. I don't think it is, but you can still look, and when the opportunities come, you address that. So then that gets us over to that legislative side of things. You have to make the progress on the legislation. And so this was impacted by state law being passed. That's what creates this mechanism of two tracks. The way to change a law that you don't like and that is infringing on your rights when the court is unwilling or unable to remove it or has ruled against you, is to change the law. You have to go through changing the law. So if we want to change the law, you have to have the ability to engage with the legislative process. That means relationships with the current legislators. That's something that I certainly try to lean into, is to try to find ways where we can get legislators to be their most bold conservative selves, right? Like you might agree 90% with one legislator, you might only agree 60% with another legislator, but you need to be trying to engage with both of them to see ways that you can move forward that advance a cause that you believe in, including getting back to this pre-SB 54 empowered delegate caucus convention system. And then also you have to change the numbers. If you don't have the numbers to get the vote that you have right now, you work with the current elected officials, but when there's seats available, when there's elections, I think it behooves the Republican Party voters, it behooves the delegates to engage on this issue, to ask those questions, to find candidates that they feel respect and agree with them, or are willing to sit at the table and find commonality to move forward. We have to look at that. There's a ton of opportunities in Utah these next couple of years with the number of likely seats that we're going to have in the in the state Senate. There's a number of folks that are getting to an age that I assume that there's going to be some substantial turnover. Obviously, there's always a chance for anybody to run for office each election cycle, and you might have natural turnover that way. But there's going to be these opportunities. We have to be focused on it. So again, circling back, my commitment is to the caucus convention system, and to making sure that SB 54 is something that we do not just say, oh, it is what it is, and we're going to just have to deal with it. You have to abide by the law, but you can work to change that law. Again, it's going to be a long-term effort. You have to be willing to do the long game, to change those numbers legislatively. That's multiple election cycles. And it gets back to what I talked about before. If the party is constantly in the, we're influential, we have a seat at the table, we're well-funded, and then we're not. Yeah. And then we are, and then we're not. It becomes incredibly difficult to continue to work on issues that require a time commitment, like the changing and repealing of SB 54. One other thing that I'll point to is, and I think this is the most important piece, it's good to have a carrot in addition to the stick.
Right.
Sometimes we're really good as a party to be like, oh, well, if you don't vote my way, I'm voting you out. Or I don't like you, I'm going to run somebody against you. And by all means, let's do that. Everybody has the right to do that. Nobody owns their elected office, right? Once you're elected, it's not yours. This isn't some sort of like title that came with birth. You have the privilege to serve us for a season, and you have to earn the right to continue to serve us.
Right.
So have that stick of saying, hey, please do this and keep people accountable. But if we think we're going to change people's opinion just through threats, we're missing our greatest opportunity. I'm a big believer that the carrot is always more effective in creating change than the stick. And certainly I would take a carrot alone over a stick alone. It's good to have a combination, but I'd rather have a very big carrot than just rely on a very big stick. And so you look at that, we have to create the party benefits and make them so abundantly clear to elected officials and to candidates that they don't want to ignore the party process. They don't want to ignore the delegate process. So speaking specifically to things that I've done, you go back a number of years when I was the C&B chair at the party, we crafted a change in our bylaws that said post-convention and between the convention and the primary, the party resources would solely be available to the candidates who earned the support of the delegates. So drafted that when I was C&B chair. We got it passed when I was the vice chair of the party. And then as chair, it's the first time that we actually held to that. So anybody who thinks like, well, what are you doing to repeal SB 54? One, I can't do that unilaterally. But what are you doing to support the delegate process? Okay, well, I planted the seeds 6 years ago, and then we're now starting to see the harvest that comes from that. This last election cycle was the very first time that we deployed that we had resources that were only available to convention-supported candidates. And so truly the high water mark of money spent in delineating between convention winners and non-convention winners prior to last year was $0. And this last year we spent $130,000 on this effort.
So we have, and I think, so we did something similar too, and we joined Salt Lake GOP with the Bang the Drum efforts. And this was the first time that anybody knows of where we solely got behind them. We had a flyer. We used our, so that when the convention was over and they went into the primary, they had the support of the party behind them. And so there has been, with us in our county, with 72% new delegates, having never been in the process before, they wouldn't know that. Right. They wouldn't know. And so we were joking that this was a training wheel, like hands tied behind our back doing this thing blind, and we still did really well. And so and so as soon as it was over, we kind of gathered and said, okay, well, what did we learn and what can we do better? And we thought, man, we have so many ideas for how we can make that thing better. But I think people do need to know, from a county perspective, at least we want people to know that was our first time ever attempting that. And so, and we weren't sure how it was going to go. And it from our numbers and the data that's on our website, it's fantastic. Like, it went really well. People are upset about the top races. If you look at the races, which are the races that would do the overturning of what you said, those races were there. We had 12 out of 18 that were won by our convention winners on the state races. That's fantastic. We only had 6 out of 24 signature gatherers across the state win in the primary. So I wish people knew those statistics. When they came out, we were so excited that I literally called, I think, a backyard barbecue at my house so we could talk about the numbers, because I had so many text threads, going at the same time. I just said, okay, everybody come to my house tonight and we'll have hamburgers and we will look at this data. And it was so exciting. it's been so frustrating to get that message out. People just don't seem to pick it up, but I just go look at the numbers on the website. So I know from your guys' efforts as well, which we appreciated.
And it was their first, it was the state's first time doing this too.
Yeah.
The state's first time doing it. And it was that collaboration with the counties, because ultimately the state is at its strongest point when it is supporting the county parties. Because keep in mind, who executes caucus? The county party, not the state party. Yeah. Who executes most of the elections, like across the state, when you're looking at county races and local races and even legislative races. It's the counties. It's not the state. The state does a lot of them. And certainly there's important functions that the state does. But the party in Utah, it's 30 parties. You have the state party that's the umbrella, and you have 29 individual county parties. And so it was that collaboration with you guys here in Utah County. It was that collaboration with Chris and his team up in Salt Lake County and a number of counties, rural and along the Wasatch Front, that we were able to, again, for the first time in Utah's post SB 54 reality, actually provide that carrot. And that's what we have to maintain doing. Provide the carrot. You don't want to ignore the party. You want the benefit of what the party apparatus has. And out of respect to the delegates, I think they deserve it. They deserve the fact that they put in the effort, they put in the time of vetting these candidates, of going to convention, of engaging at convention, that the work that they did deserve to be known to fellow Republicans. And so informing people of where the delegates landed, I think, was the appropriate thing to do.
Yeah. There was one thing that you guys did, and I don't know, we did it as well. And it was kind of a gauge just to see where some of our elected officials were, not as a caucus convention's near and dear to our heart. And so we did a pledge, and you guys did a pledge as well for caucus convention. And, I had a little bit of pushback there are some legislators who don't like to take pledges at all. I am sympathetic to that. However, I feel like this one's kind of a big one for our party. But I knew you guys had a pledge page going as well on your state website. Those are still
up on our socials, and I think more information is better for any voter. And if a voter cares about this issue, it's going to be one of the things that they vote on. Some other voters, they might not care about this issue, but they'll have other issues. I think the responsibility of the party is to transparently provide a lot of data to best inform all of our voters, to be the most tied to in understanding not only what we believe, what our platform is, but what the candidates believe. And is there a marriage there? Or is there a pretty big separation between where that candidate's priorities are and what our party believes? I think it's important to make that known to folks.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's the perfect plug for our platform thing that we're doing. But that aside, so here's maybe one of the tougher questions, because I had people come to me and they basically said, well, Rob didn't help the state party. They're blaming you, but the state party didn't help the convention winners enough. And I, just to kind of preface this a little bit and pile on to what Cristy was pointing out in particular, is that if you look at the things that typically win races, like who spent the most money and who was the incumbent, I mean, the governor's race in particular, it was a 9-point race, and it should have been like a 60-point race, right? Just by all the other things, all the other numbers, and so we did do it, and I don't know. You can attribute that to some of the efforts that we put forward, and the state also provided Numenar, which was the door knocking app and things like that. But so I think a lot of it was the effort that people put in, not necessarily the money. But I did have people come to me and say they didn't give enough money to the candidates, and I had some people trying to tell me that. And I honestly haven't had a chance to validate some of this. So you can just tell us where it's right or wrong, but that you gave it to them a little bit later than you should have, and so it wasn't able to make the difference that it should have made. Yeah. And so, can you kind of clarify the timeline and let people know how that went?
Happy to. So keep in mind, the party has a neutrality requirement. So the party leadership and the party itself in the process has a neutrality requirement, and so from filing. And really from the start of an election cycle, and a lot of these big races, the election cycle started well before filing. It might be a year in advance. We had some candidates almost a year in advance announcing that they were a candidate for office. Sometimes in the case of like a legislator or a member of Congress, if they win election, it's like, oh, and I'm going to run for a re-election in 2 years. It's a 2-year thing. So you have to be neutral while they're just an elected official or just a candidate, clear up until the convention. And like I mentioned before, we changed that bylaw 6 years ago that gives us kind of an ability to suspend that neutrality requirement between convention and primary. But until the convention, we have to be neutral. It's about providing a fair space.
Okay.
And you wouldn't want the leadership team or the SEC or even the party chair putting their thumb on the scale one way or the other on that. It's the delegates. So it doesn't matter if somebody is a convention-only candidate or a dual-path candidate. That's up to the delegates, in my opinion, to decide what they want to do on that. So you have that neutrality.
I just want to point out, too, because I've heard some people basically say that they want to see the leadership take, a stand against a candidate that they don't like or an elected official that's running for re-election.
But
and I just
to change the party constitution.
Well, no, but my point is that if you have somebody you agree with in the chair position that can do that, then you can have somebody in the chair position you don't agree with to do that for somebody else. And so I for one wholly support the neutrality setup that we have, because you can't have people putting their thumb on the scale until the delegates speak.
Yeah.
Anyway, go ahead.
Absolutely agree. I agree with the neutrality in that space in partisan races. So a number of things that we deployed early on starting in January, and there's a bunch of things we did beforehand to try to encourage, of course, and I'm sure we're going to talk about caucus. So I'll kind of save some of this, but encouraging participation and attendance to caucus, support for caucus. But really, come January, when you have the actual filing of candidates, we then knew who our candidates were. And all of the candidates that had state races, they came that were seeking the Republican nomination. I don't remember there being any that were just signature only who were serious. I think there was like one or two races where somebody filed to be a signature only candidate trying to get the Republican nomination, and they never did anything. And didn't, less than 1% of the vote. So aside from like one or two cases there, everybody was going through the convention. So you have to be fair through the convention. Right. And so what we did, the most important piece of the convention, it's not all of the Republicans. It's not 950,000 members of the party around the state. It's 4,000 delegates, right? So you elect them at caucus, making sure that that information was provided fairly. And so we implemented, for the first time, systems that allowed updates to happen live. So when a delegate hey, you had a bad email, let's update that email. That happened live in a system that every candidate had access to. So let's say, Chuck, you and Cristy are running for office against each other for the
Bring it, lady.
Right? It's a
I'm not a fighter.
In the past, let's say you reached out to me and you asked for an updated delegate list. Well, and then I send you the updated delegate list that has all of these fixes. And I don't think to send it to Cristy, and Cristy doesn't reach out for a week. Well, she's got bad emails for a week, and you had some advantage there. So we did things to really, truly level the playing field and make it fair, so that the system that everybody had access to at the same time showed those changes and those updates at the same time.
Okay.
So you do that fairly for the delegate process. Well, again, we passed that bylaw that I helped to author a number of years ago. And so post-convention, suddenly the difference maker, that carrot, got to kick in. And so the things that we did to support our convention winners, they began happening that night.
That's what I was going to ask. I was going to say, so post-convention, you mean like within a week? So you're saying like...
That night. So I will tell you, before convention was adjourned, and delegates, you remember, we were there late into the night. We'll talk about that a little bit later.
Yes, we will.
So it was a long day, and it was an inspiring day in many ways. But before that day was over, access to party resources, including party data, was turned off to any candidate who was disqualified at convention.
So somebody was sitting in the Salt Palace turning it off.
Yeah, we turned it, like, literally. You lose your race, you lost it at 1 or whatever, but you're continuing on because you had signatures. You lost access to party data within 30 minutes or so of that race being called. So literally that night, if you're talking about hey, the difference in getting resources and all of that, we started as quickly and as soon as our rules would allow. And again, it's that neutrality, because at that point, the delegates have spoken. I'm not bound any longer to neutrality. I'm able to put, and the state party can put their thumb on the scale according to our rules to delineate between who had the convention delegate support and who didn't earn that support. So data access immediately went off. Numenar, you talked about, this was a walking app that what it does, and this is something we invested in and provided to every candidate Every single candidate in every single race, county, state, and otherwise in Utah, we paid for them to have access to a walking app, to data, to all of their voters, all of their registered voters that they could use. Phenomenal application. There's a couple of other tools that do that. So there's one called Votive that's actually a Utah company. They do a great job too. For a couple of reasons, we went with this company called Numinar, but we provided that to everybody. That was turned off for folks that were not convention winners. So if you're a convention winner, you continued to get access to something that created massive efficiencies, that saved you a ton of money, that actually gave you the ability to go and know what doors to knock based off of what parameters you want to put in, so that you were talking to the people you want to talk to. That was available day of convention to convention winners, not to those who lost at convention. And then we continued to work with all of these campaigns on their data. So we were perfecting our data and trying to do different like targeting and things. All of our get out the vote efforts were done in coordination with our convention winning candidates. They weren't done in collaboration with non-convention winners. That began, what was April 27th was the day of state convention. The 29th is when we sent in the certification letter. I was probably busy on that. The collaboration probably began first couple of days of May, collaborating on the data and the get out the vote efforts. The money distribution, because we did make direct dollar contributions to people's campaigns.
That's where most of the questions have come in to me.
And those happened, I'd have to go back and look. Those, I believe, happened in late May or early June.
Okay.
Maybe it was mid-May. And there was a couple of different tranches. But a couple of things that we have to do on this is keep in mind, you have to make sure you have the funds. And you need to make sure that you budget for everything. So like I see it as a triage perspective. There's things that you have to do. You have to pay the bills that the party has, right? You then have to pay for the things that, like, if the party doesn't do it, we're in trouble either as a party or our candidates are in trouble.
Right.
You have to pay the bills of convention. Convention, renting a space and doing all that you do for convention costs more than $100,000. Like, you have to pay all of those. Then you look at additional resources that were available. So we did that as quickly as we could. We also had to have an executive committee meeting. So we did an executive committee meeting there in May. And we discussed that. I'm trying to remember the date on that. Can't remember it off the top of my head, but we had those discussions. And then we went forward and paid. We also had an SEC meeting where we talked about it as well. The thing that I would say, if folks really think that the party should be funding campaigns, that's a losing endeavor. I'll say it right now. If the party is the sole way to fund a campaign, then that campaign is probably not ready for prime time. A candidate has to have the ability to execute and fund what they have in their control. The party is at its best, certainly helping, and I'm glad that we gave money. But where our true value is, like, what's the cost multipliers? What's the economies of scale that we can bring to bear? Because you can, like, let's say we had 10 races right here. I gave $10,000 to each one. Okay, there's $100,000. I probably could create more value for all of these races by spending $100,000 on voter identification and get out the vote efforts for the voters that would vote for all 10 of those races than I get from giving them all dollar donations. So that's important, I think, for people to consider. But it is good, and it's also a good expression of support and faith. And that was why I prioritized this. Again, it's a carrot. So we wanted to show that expression. And so we gave to all of our statewide races. We gave to that there was a convention winner. We gave to all of our, like, legislative races where there was a convention winner and they still had a primary. We gave to our state school board races. So we gave quite a bit of money that went to all of these campaigns. And then beyond that, beyond the dollar donation, literally worked with each of these campaigns clear until the primary on doing get out the vote efforts, on doing supporting the counties in the bang the drum, supporting mailers, supporting phone calls, digital ads, text message blasts, email blasts, fundraising solicitations, fundraising introductions to donors, billboards. Those are, there's probably a couple things I'm thinking or forgetting right off the top of my head, but we literally did all of those, and those started the night of convention.
Yep. Yeah, one of the things we did here was social media ads, among other things. And so,
yeah, we did some of those. We leaned in more we found a lot of success with this targeted approach that I actually started beginning the year before in our municipal race. I don't want to get too much into the sausage making, simply because while I love our delegates, if a Democrat ever watches this, I don't want them gaming against us. Be like, wait, so you're doing what?
Yeah.
But I'll just tell you, we figured out some things. We perfected in the municipal race. We use it again in trying to get people out to caucus. We use it again in supporting our delegates, and we use it again in get out the vote efforts in the primary that have played very well on how to target the voters that we want, that we know support our Republican platform and principles. I'm very pleased with how that's performed. And you talked about the closing the gaps on some of these races against a lot of money and a lot of power of incumbency.
Yep.
I think it says that some things are working very well.
Yep. One other angle on, I feel like I'm asking you hard questions, and then anyway.
Wait, can I just talk really quick about because the three of us dealt with a bill this last session on party data. And I know that a lot of people think that we in our county have all the data of every registered Republican in our county.
Oh, we wish.
Yeah, we wish. And when Chris Knoll and I did the County Polls podcast, Yemi was out of town, and we interviewed Mike Schultz. We told him the data that we got as a party, and he was blown away. He had no idea how limited we were in our data. He kind of stopped the podcast and he was like, "What? You guys don't get that?" And we were like, "We don't get that." Yeah. So our hands are very tied with data and what the state will give us. So
here's some important information on that. The party has never received emails from the state.
Right.
Never received emails.
No emails.
We stopped receiving phone numbers in, I want to say it was like 2009. So phone numbers were no longer provided if they existed on a person's voter registration, were no longer provided. About 10 years ago, for maybe some sincere reasons, efforts to protect privacy, and I like privacy, I like protecting privacy, but efforts to protect privacy passed some laws that created anonymity and options for anonymity within the voter registration files. This is where my support for privacy is no longer. I believe that the foundation of a republic is based off of the ability to vote for the people that you want to represent you. So voter integrity, election integrity, transparency, accuracy, all of that matters. You can't do that when you have
when you can't see everybody who votes. Yeah.
And so some delegates might not know this, but you guys know this, between 30 and 40%, sometimes even higher, depending on the
it's upwards of 60% depending.
Yep. In some areas it's as high as 60%. They're in this category called withheld status.
Yeah.
And a challenge that comes from that is if we don't know that they exist as the party, what's sad is when they're like, "Hey, I've never heard from you. Like, you haven't reached out to us. I didn't know about caucus." I think about
this happens all the time.
Yeah.
I don't know what else to do. I'm not allowed to know you exist. Literally, I'm not allowed to know your name, where you are, anything about you. And so then it's like the things that we do to try to get people involved in the party. It's relying on Facebook ads, it's doing radio ads, it's doing billboards, it's doing word of mouth, it's getting precincts to walk their precinct. And that's powerful, but you can't overcome the deficiency that you have when you're just not allowed to know 40% of people's name, where they are and their registration status. So the state legislature has moved that back a little bit, maybe 6 years ago, 7 years ago. It really didn't fix the issue. It just kind of slowed the growth of it being as bad as it was, but it was already bad.
Right.
So Cristy and I and Chuck, you were there, a number of other county folks. It was a rally the troops, and we were heavily engaged in trying to get this one addressed. And last year's election cycle made it clear. And you look like the questions that exist in regard to like signature verification, the questions that exist in regard to like the ballot signature path process of candidates that exist even around like other elements of knowing if a candidate was doing things exactly right or not. You can't know with the way that things are. And so the party even was denied in all of our grandma requests. So we tried to petition for access to all of that information. We were not allowed to have that information because, again, state law prevented it. Luckily, the legislature on this one is recognizing like, wow, this was not our intended, and I don't think it was the intended purpose of the legislature that passed this a decade ago. And so they're fixing it. We almost got a bill, as you know. We got it from okay to really good, and then it fell back, and it was not quite what it needed to be, and so we were able to kill that bill, but we're working to bring that back, that we can get back to a place where the voter rolls and that foundational piece is fully understood and trusted, because then you have the full access of that data.
I mean, can you imagine? Like, really, it's so simple. We don't know who our members are.
Yep.
It's crazy. When I found this out, I was like, what do you mean we don't know who they are? Or I'll get a new precinct chair that says, hey, I need to communicate with my precinct. Will you please send me? Yes. So I send a list, and then I already know there's another email coming back saying, oh, I don't think you sent me a complete, it's missing emails, and there's only a few phone numbers, and I'm like, and so honestly, like in a very positive sense, like the fact that we operate to the high level that we do, and the successes that we had with the limited data. So we know, and we've brainstormed ways in our county that we're going to, solve this problem, work around this problem, and it's the same thing with SB 54. Are there ways that we can legislate and fix this, right? Because they are the stopgate. They collect the party information. We don't. A lot of people think that we have it and then we give it to them, or somehow there is a really wonderful relationship where they share. It's not how it works. We have to fight for it. And but if we can figure out who our members are, the sky is the limit. Like it's incredible. We'll get there. We have a couple of ideas, just like SB 54, on ways that we can either go around it. But my goodness, these are our members. We want to communicate with them. They want to hear from us, and we don't want to be stopped in the middle of it. But that was a big obstacle. And probably if somebody said, what's the most shocking thing that you have learned about how this all works? It is the control of the data for me.
100%. And it goes beyond that too, even separate from like the voter registration rolls. You look like when I came in as party chair 2 years ago, we had about 14,000 valid emails that were connected to like a known person. There was a chunk of other emails, but we didn't even have a name associated with it. So it's like,
okay, so 14,000 out of how many registered?
What, 900 and like high 900,000 Republicans in the state of Utah. 14,000 emails. Like, are you kidding me? Like, that's not even a good starting point. That's like, we really don't have anything. And so that's been an effort, is to try to create the systems. And this has been a big priority of mine these last 2 years. Raise the amount of funding necessary to do the work that actually solves the issues. So perfecting data, having data management systems, supporting candidates, promoting caucus, bringing in new Republicans, all of that costs a lot of money. So raising the money has to matter. Very pleased with how successful we've been able to be over the last 2 years in raising those funds. But what you do with the funds is the big thing. And so what I've been trying to do is building these systems that will last for years and years to come and outlast all of us, so that a chair and a leadership team and an SCC and delegates a decade from now are benefiting from the systems that we've built. So we've gone from 14,000 emails, we're up to about 140,000 connected, open-rated emails. All of that's been through acquisition and through a couple of different efforts. A big chunk of that came from our caucus process. And so when we talk about caucus, we can talk about this element too. It's all about trying to fill that gap. 14,000 was an abysmal start. 140, now we're getting there. We can't stop there. We have to keep going. We have 900 plus, 980,000, whatever it is, Republicans. We need to get as close to all of those as we can to get full participation. But I'm far more pleased with where we're at today at 140,000 than where we were when I started at 14.
Yep. I'm going to circle us back just for a second, because there was another concern that people had with the way that we handled things. I say we, the party, between the convention and just support of SB, or getting rid of SB 54 in general. And then I want to come back to this, because there are like 3 other things that I want to talk about that all relate to what we were just talking about. But I want to just kind of close out this section. And what it is I was talking to somebody at the meet and greet on Monday, and, people are talking about who are you supporting in the chair race. And of course, I try to keep that out of the discussion as far as like for our secretary race and stuff, because it doesn't really apply. But somebody basically said, well, I don't know how you can support Rob Axson if he says he wants to get rid of SB 54, but then he's kissing the, and I'm going to amend this to rear ends of the people who are trying to get rid of the caucus system.
Did they give you an example?
No.
I would love to know what they're even referring to. So I think the party chair's role is to, and I think this is an expression of leadership too, is you have to build consensus. You have to move things in the right direction. Now, I would be very concerned if you looked at an individual's behavior, if you looked at my behavior, and I was working against the principles of the party.
Mm-hmm.
But if I'm sticking to what the party believes in and am able to bring somebody who is an odd fellow in line to work towards that goal, that's a success.
Mm-hmm.
You look at President Trump, for example. President Trump, and I think one of the greatest attributes that he has is his ability to work with people from a broad cross-section of not only the party, but heck, you look at Tulsi Gabbard. She was a Democrat until just a little bit ago. Kennedy, he's an independent now, but really, I mean, he was a candidate for president as the Democrat nomination was being pursued a year ago, and now he's the Secretary of Health and Human Services in the Trump administration.
Yeah.
Tulsi Gabbard ran against President Trump 4 years ago for the Democrat nomination for president, and now she's there providing national security guidance. Like, you have somebody who's able to bring people along. Donald Trump has done better with Hispanics. He's done better with with African Americans. He's done better with young people. He's done better with blue collar workers. Talk about building a coalition. That's how you win races. That's how you change really the trajectory of a state, of a country. If we want to get back to a place where the party is fully respected in regard to our delegate process, you have to build the coalition. So I think it would be important for delegates to ask themselves the question, is there concern that I don't throw bombs at people? Well, that's just not my style. I'll tell it straight out. I don't care how much we disagree on an issue. You're not going to hear me like cussing you out. You're not going to see me like posting some attack on you. Like, life's too short for me to be doing that type of thing. That's just not my personality. But definitely be critical of me if I'm watering down the fight and watering down the principles. But for that individual's concern, I'd love to know what they're specifically talking about. My background.
I was going to say that the impression that I get is mostly that they see you associating with people who they know are working against us in one way or another. Yeah. And so
I would love to know the example, because there's a couple of people, and again, my style is not to throw people under the bus. There's a couple of people who are very vocal publicly of their hatred for the caucus process and work tirelessly against us. I don't have any relationship with those people. Like, if I was forced to sit at a table and have a conversation with them, I'll have a conversation with them, and I will not water down one iota my defense of the caucus convention system and belief in our party's platform and principles. So I'm just not following. Now, if it's a concern because I have a relationship with elected officials, okay, well, I have a relationship with elected officials. You look back professionally prior to the last 2 years where I've been in the private sector, what I did for my livelihood is I worked for Senator Lee for 13 years. So I helped get him elected through the caucus convention system back in 2010. I worked on his campaign after very quickly identifying him as my preferred candidate for the United States Senate. And then once he was elected, I was brought into his staff. I first spent 3 years back in Washington, D.C. working on legislation, came back to his Utah office. The last 7 years I worked for him, I was his state director. And so the role that I had as his state director is to coordinate all of his staff efforts, his office efforts, his priorities in Utah, and specifically to work with elected officials in all 29 counties and the legislature, and then business leaders and grassroots activists and everybody else. So I've developed a lot of relationships. So if the concern is, well, Robert knows people across the political spectrum of the Republican Party, if that is a legitimate concern of somebody, then I might not be their guy, because I don't just focus on one contingency of our party. But I do think the core question that this individual probably had is just maybe an assumption that, wait, if he's talking with elected official X or whomever, does that mean he's watering down our principles? And I'd love to have a conversation with that delegate. But I can assure you that's never been my style. I'm very proud of being very transparent with what I believe and what I'll defend and what I'll promote. And without wavering, I am committed to the principles that come through our process, through our platform. And like I said, there's no better system in the entire country than our delegate process and the grassroots support that comes from that.
Yeah. I think the thing that I would add is that, and I've been trying to get through to people, again, with the chair race or with, somebody will come and they'll be like, oh, Representative so-and-so is just so terrible because this, that, and the other. And so, yeah, I think that's probably a lot of where it's coming from. But to my thinking, I'm in this for my family, right? Like there are certain things that I want to do with my life and I want to be free to pursue them. And there are certain things that I know my kids are going to want to pursue in their lives and I want them free to pursue them. Right. And so at the end of the day, if I have to talk to Representative so-and-so who is reprehensible on 90% of things and work with them on the other 10% of things, gosh darn, I'm going to be talking to Representative so-and-so if they can get it over the line. Yeah. And so we've kind of seen this on some of the legislative stuff that Cristy brought up, right, with the data, right, where there was that issue. There were like 2 or 3 other bills that I know that you and she worked on together, either to heavily promote or to fight it against it, right? And to me, that's the deal is, if you can get some of these people to come along, and I'm sure some of it is, hey, look, we really appreciate you doing the right thing on all these other things, and we really appreciate you now doing the right thing here and getting them to come over. And I'm sure some of it is, hey, look, we have some leverage here or there where, we need you to come along and, we're hoping we can get you to listen to us because you have that and anything in between. Right. But my point is that if you have an elected official you don't like and you can get them to come along a little bit, that's a win. Oh. Right. And so I was hoping to talk to you a little bit about this because I was so impressed with, trying to get a hold of you or trying to get a hold of Cristy and it's, hey, I'm at the Capitol today all day working on these bills. So do you want to talk about some of the effort you put in on turning the ship or moving the needle or whatever metaphor you want to use on some of these bills? Because I think it's important for people to see that, hey, look, we're not just a party that yells at each other about signature path.
Yeah, 100%. We talked about this at the beginning, that a party chair and a party leadership team and the party itself needs to be focused on a bunch of different things. So finding candidates, growing the party, communicating our principles, defending against bad PR, promoting good PR, defending against bad laws, changing laws. Like you have to be doing all of these things. And then in each one of those, like supporting our candidates. Well, for the state party, there's scores of candidates across the state. There's hundreds of candidates. So it can't just be about one race. It has to be about success in as many of those races as possible. The same is true there on the legislative session and in state law here in Utah. It's not just about fighting for one bill. There might be 20 bills that if they went into effect would be extremely harmful to the party. And there might be another 20 bills that if they went into effect, it would be extremely beneficial to the party. And that
I would point out, though, that some of the bills that I was hearing about from Cristy weren't just harmful or helpful to the party. They were like real freedom issues, too. Like there were some of those.
Yeah, it's those core issues. Like, keep in mind, the party is that apparatus. I've said this before, and I firmly believe this. Like, the party isn't the goal. Being a Republican isn't my goal in life.
Right.
My goal in life is, like you, promoting a future that is good for my kids. My 4 kids are my priority.
Right.
The future that they have, that is like dead center of my target. There's other peripheral and secondary and tertiary issues, but that's my priority. And promoting those principles and saving those principles, the party can be a force multiplier to do that. And so you can't just look at like a bill is this beneficial for the party? Okay, it's supported. Or is this harmful to the party? Okay, we oppose it. We also need to think, like, is this creating the expression of life for Utahns that is in line with our platform, freedom and liberty and all of these things. And yeah, this is where I spent a lot of my time. And I'll tell you, during the legislative session, I think there was maybe 4 days, maybe 5. I think 3 or 4 days that I wasn't at the Capitol for at least a good chunk of the day. Oftentimes it was, you're there at the Capitol at 7, you're there until 8 or 9 at night. And
have you caught up on sleep yet?
I think so, but like the extra pounds are still there and the grays are still there, but hey, that's okay.
Yeah, Cristy was saying it was debatable when I asked her. So
it was exhausting. I mean, even that last night, there we were, and Cristy and I were sitting next to each other there in the gallery, and I think there was 2 bills specifically, one that we really wanted to go through as long as it was amended,
right,
and another one that if it went through, it's like, no, like this will be massively difficult. And so we're trying to get legislators, we're pulling them out in the hall, we're talking with them up in the gallery, making sure we're making eye contact, seeing what's happening, and that went clear until midnight.
Oh yeah. Wow. It was a scary. It's always scary. That whole thing is scary. But I just want to echo, we tend to focus and previously party and then, the legislative session. And we had this conversation as a team of like, if everything we do is about getting our platform into governance, this is an area where we need to engage. Mm-hmm. And we haven't previously engaged as a party on a level of where we're saying, like, collectively, these are the principles that we espouse. We need to make sure that either, good stuff goes through and bad stuff gets stopped. And my team was awesome to say, hey, we got to figure some of this stuff out. But, oh, man, there is nothing worse than I have, like, this just level of anxiety throughout the whole thing. And as soon as that session ends, there's a whole, I just relax and go, okay, all right, we made it through another one, because you just don't know. And even like you said, up until the last minute, we had stuff that was like really scary on the line. No, it's a roller coaster.
Well, there's the things where it's like, what you know, but you never know what you don't know.
Yeah, yeah.
And that's the concern. It's like, okay, what bill do we not know about?
Yeah.
Because it hasn't been made public yet. What's it going to do? Or even if you're aware of it, some of those bills, like really diving in and understanding what the ramifications would be of their implementation, good or bad, are very difficult to understand. And that's why it required a lot of time. And I mean, there were dozens and dozens of meetings that were had, and kind of circling back to the question you asked me immediately before of the concern that this delegate expressed to you, like, well, he knows some of these elected officials or he interacts with those folks. I'll tell you the benefit that comes from that. I was not turned down on a single meeting.
Oh, wow.
Not a single meeting was I turned down on. And I was able to go, and there was a couple of Democrats who actually came to the party's defense during the interim session, voted the way that we needed them to on a couple of bills, were helpful during the legislative session. And it's not that I agree with those folks on policy. It's probably like, I don't know, 20% of the time that I would agree with them on policy. But if you approach people with respect and you build a reputation that your word is your bond, and that you are, when you say you'll do something, you do it, and you're not, pulling a fast one on people, that gives you the opportunity to be invited to be at the table. And the party will be at its best when we're all collectively at the table. When things happen with the party not at the table, that's when the worst things happen. And oftentimes it's not even because it was the intention of the legislator that was passing the bill. It's that they didn't think about it from the perspective of what our needs were. Getting back to that one of party data and voter registration, they were focused on privacy. That's a laudable effort.
Yep.
They missed the fact that they were undermining election integrity, or political engagement, community building, and everything else. So the party has to have a seat at the table. So yeah, I was never turned down on a meeting. Cristy knows we had some tense meetings up there.
Yeah.
Meetings where we came in and sometimes I was the bad guy, sometimes she was the bad guy, and we good cop, bad copped it, and we were tenacious. And I'm grateful for a lot of support from some incredible county chairs and their teams, the 2 of you included, that were a part of this. And this is a lot of the stuff that most people never know about, or oftentimes maybe not even care about. But I feel that it is in many ways kind of the core of the whole point of party service as a chair, is to do your best to get legislation and to get policy and to get the culture of this state moving in the right direction.
Yeah, it's interesting too, because I was listening to an interview, I don't remember who it was with, but they were talking about the political systems in California. And they were basically saying that one-party states tend to have problems with corruption and things like that, right? Because there's not a good check on the single party doing whatever it wants.
Yeah.
Right. And, I've talked to enough people to where they have that concern here too.
Totally.
And
it's valid.
Right.
Yeah.
So, that kind of prefaces this question a little bit, but I feel like a lot of times, we get together as a party and we basically just argue over what the best way is to get rid of the signature path. And I feel like we miss stuff. Like we actually do miss stuff, right? Because we're so focused on that little thing. So what else should we be focusing on policy-wise?
Well, can I just say, and I agree, like SB 54, I am 100% against. I will do everything I can. Caucus convention is where it's at. We had 3 bills that I think collectively, if you added them up, would have been just as detrimental to the party this last session that we were able to kill. And people don't understand that there can be something worse. And it's bad. Like SB 54 is bad, but as far as some of these things came out of left field, and like you said, some were good and then they went bad. And we had to really watch it. I mean, we had a Zoom call where we thought everything was really good, and then we went into a committee meeting and we found language and some changes where we were like, no, that's got to die, because it was so great to be. This is an anecdotal comment. And to be on a team where we were saying, how does this affect the party? What will this do to my county? How will this affect this state party? And having those conversations, because I don't know how many of those conversations have been had across the board with multiple county chairs previously. And so it was great and terrifying to think we might be missing something, but great to be able to have other people to bounce those ideas off of during this last session. So yeah, I'm just reiterating how important all of that was this last year.
Our collaboration and our team effort was important. And some of this is my the things that I'm most pleased with and most proud of what we've been able to accomplish as a team, and what I've been able to do these last 2 years is to get new high water marks. So I look at it as, okay, this is the new high water mark for engagement during a legislative session. That doesn't mean that we just try to hit that mark again or even like scale back. That's just a high water mark. We can now see the goal. Let's go above and beyond that. Same thing with fundraising. Same thing with building collaboration with the county parties. I look at all of it. You have to build and learn from the lessons that worked, learn from the lessons that didn't work, and pivot and continue to move forward. But one more thing that I'll express on this issue, and again, the importance of being able to talk to people, even if they're to the right of you or to the left of you within the party. And I'll just say, my politics, I'm pretty far right. That's where I am. If this is the political spectrum of the Republican Party, like anything to the left of my left hand is, okay, you're kind of outside of our party platform. And this is where you're at. I'm a lot closer to my right hand than I am to the left hand. But the role that you should take as a party leader is anybody to the left of you within the party and anybody to the right of you, as long as it's focused on the platform and the principles of the party, you work together on that. And when you do that, I'll tell you, the bill that Cristy and I and others, and you were in some of those meetings as well, Chuck, that we worked the most on, like in regard to time. There might have been some other ones that were more important and could have been detrimental and things, but the amount of time that was put into this bill was no less than collectively probably a couple hundred hours. I mean, it was a lot of time and a lot of meetings, and ultimately it wasn't where it needed to be. And 2 days before the end of the session, because of the relationship that I have with that legislator and others, I was able to kill the bill and do it in a respectful, collaborative manner. And we're continuing to work on that issue to try to solve that issue. But I'll tell you, if you don't have a relationship with folks, and if you're approaching it in a combative or a purity test type way, you don't have the ability to get a legislator at the end of a very tiring 45-day session be willing to take what could be perceived as a win. They take an issue and they solve a lot of it, and they get to say, I passed this, I solved a lot of the issue. You won't be in a place where you can get them to stop and realize it's not ready yet and be willing to kill it. We were able to do that.
Awesome. All right, I'm gonna go at some of these other questions. So one other area that I've had people bring up, with you in particular, and granted, I understand the convention. There's a convention committee, and things like that. I was on the convention committee. I think I still am, maybe not. But The question is that there were a handful of things that didn't go right at the convention, right?
Yeah.
The things specifically that I heard the most about were the credentialing line. And I felt like you kind of explained that to the SEC, but I don't know how much of that went public. And then the other piece of it was at the very end of the convention. Mm-hmm. Right. Bob McEntee standing at the mic, and he's trying to get this Constitution amendment passed so we can do platform amendments. Right. And I had a bunch of people say, we could have done that. We could have done that before we had to wrap up. So can you speak to those? And then any other just oddities with the convention that people might go, oh, that didn't work. Like we did have a voting issue in my state school board race, right? And we voted by paper. So anyway.
And how did that go in pivoting to paper?
It went fine. Yeah.
Wait, it goes fine with paper? What?
I'm not going to pick on that issue.
Yeah,
we do that plenty on our own.
And I would say the length. No, I think the biggest thing was the credentialing line, the length, and then what he said with the platform change.
So,
the
constitutional
change. Yeah. So let's go through kind of how a convention is executed. First and foremost, you have a convention committee that's putting a lot of the pieces together. And the SEC confirms a lot of those.
Right.
A lot of it comes from the party chair.
Yeah. I was going to say, ultimately, you do bear responsibility for a lot of this.
Oh, the buck stops here, right?
Yeah,
like, That's leadership. Like you take it, whether it is appropriately your responsibility or not, you take it. And so you have to be willing to always look, and I say this, I think I've even said it today, you have to be willing to learn the lessons that are good that you want to replicate. But the most important lessons in life oftentimes are the painful ones where it's like, oh man, we tried really hard. We thought we had it figured out. We went to execute it and it didn't work as well as we thought it was going to. You have to be willing to learn those lessons.
I have some lessons that my mom is still reminding me that I learned after 30 years. So
exactly. Those are the painful ones, but sometimes the best.
Yeah.
So you look at a convention and the way that this played out, I was elected April sometime, if I remember right, 2023. Beginning of May, like within 10 days, we had locked down that venue. Wow. And the issue that we had is that was the only space in the entire state of Utah available.
Wow.
And we didn't really have a bunch of days because in a caucus convention system, to fully magnify it, you want to give as much time to the delegates between caucus and the expression of their vote at convention as you possibly can. Plus the counties need to go and execute all of their conventions. So you really only have like maybe 2 weekends that you can look at. And by state law, we had to certify the results of our elections and our convention and the delegates' votes no later than 5 p.m. on the 29th of April last year. So the 27th was the Saturday before, and we could have looked at the 21st. Between both of those days, there was one space available in the entire state, and it was the space that we ended up at. So the Salt Palace, there's nothing wrong with the Salt Palace. In some ways, I don't love being downtown because some folks outside of like the Wasatch Front or outside of Salt Lake are not as familiar with driving around downtown.
We could do it in Vegas.
Yeah, there we go. I don't know if the delegates would stay. Might go to a show or a buffet, right? But, you go to a convention there at the Salt Palace, you might have to pay for parking. You might have other challenges.
Right.
But it was literally the only space. So it's like, okay, the Salt Palace is fine. And then we get there and we realize this is not an ideal space. And by get there, I don't mean at the convention. I mean like, okay, we locked down the space and like a week later we went and toured it. And it's like, this is truly the only space. So, okay, well, let's lock it down. We spent the next year almost, well, not quite a year because that was convention, but maybe 8 months, I think until about November or December, we were willing to change the venue and see if something had canceled and another venue became available. So for example, Mountain America Credit Union Expo Center there in Sandy, that one, it's right off the freeway. Parking's free. It's just a big hall. There's not like...
There are a bunch of restaurants near it so people can go eat. Yeah.
Like that one's easy. That one would have worked very well. Nothing ever canceled. So we were stuck with the space that we had. But like I said, shortly after we locked it down, went and visited it and realized like the Salt Palace is fine in many ways, but this one hall is the hall that is in the basement, and it's an L shape, like you curve. And that created a host of complexities, one of which was fire code on where you could line up. And so instead of having multiple places that we could credential folks, we were forced to kind of be in one spot, which then necessitates a line. So it's like, okay, none of this is ideal, but we have no other option. So let's mitigate and plan for this. And then a couple of curveballs came that you really couldn't plan for, and the best of intentions kind of got you there. But you have to learn from it. And so one of those was the elections would be done via Election Buddy was the application, the technology that was decided upon by the elections committee, which is part of the convention committee. But the delegates could decide if they wanted to go to paper. So I had paper ballots prepared and ready. You mentioned in your breakout that there was an issue, so that you guys pivoted to paper. Well, those paper ballots were prepared and ready for that race and for every other race. So we had those paper ballots. We also had, and correct me if I'm wrong, I wasn't a state delegate, so I didn't experience it firsthand, and I can't remember exactly, but there was like a code that you had at the end of credentialing. So there were those codes, and it was unique to you, but it wasn't specific to you. So it was a unique number that once you knew it, you could then verify your votes, but that number wasn't attached to you.
Right. You're just voter ABC 123. And then, Cristy's XYZ PDQ 127.
Exactly. And randomly handed out, so nobody knew that, that number went to Cristy and this one went to Chuck. But we had those numbers. They're physically printed numbers. We had the ballots physically printed. So it's the night before convention. And late into the night, I think it was like 1 or so in the morning, and all the booths were done being set up. And the Salt Palace staff, we had our elections room where everything was being run by. And we said, we need this locked. And we had the ballots that we were putting in there, and then that credentialing code. So we put it into the room, and they had this big lock that they could put on it. And before they locked it, we said, we have to have access to this early in the morning so that we're ready to go. People are going to start arriving at such and such time and credentialing. And they assured us, oh, no, we'll be there. We'll be fine. Well, fast forward a few hours, to the next morning, and they had lost the key. So then we were stuck. We could not.
Hey, that's security. Nobody can get in.
Nobody can get in. They had lost the key. And I'm glad that we locked it, because you should always have, control of that stuff from an election integrity perspective. But it's that curveball that, like, wow, we couldn't have planned on this. So one of the things that we're planning on, if you ever have, a padlock, you better have bolt cutters. And so it took us.
So how long did that delay you guys?
I have a set of bolt cutters. Don't ask me why, but you can borrow them next time.
We'll need those. I think we actually bought some. So it took us about an hour before we got access to that room. And
so in that time, did you have people lining up for an hour?
And so think about this.
So you're already behind on the credentialing.
Because you couldn't.
Because you can't.
Somebody until they had the.
Oh, wow. And
so that was the biggest, like, unforeseen hiccup that was outside of our control. On top of a space where it's not ideal, you can't spread out credentialing because of fire code. You're stuck with one place where we knew we would have a line. And then, just like a fender bender, you're driving to Salt Lake, somebody gets in a fender bender, it backs up traffic. They move the cars to the side of the road pretty quickly and clear it out. But clearing the traffic
it takes an hour.
Takes a lot
or
longer.
2,
The same thing happened here. We ended up with a line that, even though we got things going fairly quickly, clearing that line took a little bit longer. So those were the things that just were kind of outside of our control, but we have to figure out. So I'll tell you immediately what we did to figure this out. One, we've added all of this to the book of, like, hey, plan for these. But the other element, you guys are both on the State Central Committee. You know that the following month we had a State Central Committee, and the first thing that I brought to the State Central Committee was permission to not or to go further into the future to lock down venues, so that we were not in a situation ever again as a party where the only space available to us was the worst space for our needs. And so the State Central Committee, gratefully, you guys voted in alignment with that, gave me those authorities and permissions as a chair. And so now a chair can go 4 years into the future to start penciling in locations.
And previously it was what?
2 years?
No,
2 or 1?
Until you were the chair.
Oh, so you had to
So
become
literally,
the chair, and then you
we had to have the
could.
election.
Oh, I get it.
And I a few days after I was elected, started making the calls, and within 10 days, I think it was 10 days out, we locked in the only available space in the state. That was you couldn't go any faster than that, because Carson Jorgensen, my predecessor, he couldn't lock it in.
He couldn't do it because he wasn't going to be the chair. Yeah.
So we kind of had an unintended inefficiency within our rules that now is addressed. And so now you can go 4 years in advance. I've already started that process so that we have penciled dates.
Okay.
That's what kind of lets us learn from the lesson. The other thing to keep in mind with the state convention was twofold. Last year is going to be like one of the biggest years that Utah will have, at least every 4 years, but even beyond that, because we had an open Senate seat, an open state house or U.S. House race. That doesn't always happen. That brings more competition, generally speaking. You had, of course, all of our 4 statewide. You had a presidential election, and not that we're electing President Trump at our state convention, but we were electing all of the national delegates and all of the alternate national delegates.
Well, and people are talking about it just in real life anyway.
Yep. And so you have all of this enthusiasm and things, and then the number of races. The other element that we had last year and 2 years prior was a change in state law and moved the state school board races into partisan races.
Right.
So over the last 2 election cycles, those races have all now been elected as Republicans or Democrats. I think all but one is a Republican.
I think so too.
In Utah, gratefully and thankfully. But those are partisan races. So that's more races. So suddenly what we had last year, out of our control, we had the space that wasn't ideal. A curveball of not being able to credential on time because of election integrity things and good intentions, that then you're locked out of a door. But then you also had the sheer volume of races, number of needed breakouts, number of rounds of voting because of the number of candidates. And so one thing that I would recommend moving forward, and that I would look forward to do should I be elected, to work with the state central committee to identify other adjustments that we need to make. Now that we have the number of races that we have to run, an idea that I've had, and I've heard of a couple of other ideas, but maybe you do kind of a breakout. And so, for example, in the week leading up to the state convention, you do 2 or 3 regional meetups. And so all of those like breakout elections, you actually do a Northern Utah meeting on Monday and a Central Utah, or maybe you do it by congressional district, 1st congressional district, 2nd, 3rd, 4th. You do it at different times, and you at least clear out most of those state school board races, probably most, if not all of the legislative races, so that when you come together, you're only having to focus on congressional races, statewide races, and party business.
And whatever doesn't fit neatly into however you divvied it up.
There might be a couple where it's like, oh, that's not fair to bring somebody all the way from St. George early on and somebody from Tooele. And so you might have something like that.
Yeah.
But I think you could do that so that then day of convention, it's helping truncate the time so that you can, be respectful of everybody's time, but also have an enjoyable day, because the convention needs to be about doing the business, both elections and then like party business, considering changes to bylaws and things. But it should also be this trampoline, this springboard that we're leaving with excitement and enthusiasm for the party to be more successful.
Yep, absolutely. Yep. Speaking of party business, that was one complaint that I don't know, you didn't address the constitutional amendment at the end of the thing, but somebody else pointed out that you were promising that we were going to do more party business in between races and things. And to my recollection, I don't think a whole lot of that happened either. So
no, it didn't. And that was my intention. And we had that all ready to go. The challenge that we have is when a vote is open, you can't do any other binding business.
All right.
But you can do binding business while they're waiting to count. Well, the delay was not the counting. The counting actually happened with the election buddy system. The results came in about 30 seconds.
Right.
Once we closed the balloting. But when the balloting is open, you can't do any other business.
I gotcha.
And we were anticipating that there was going to be a little bit more time between the results happening. And it's like, oh, let's put in a constitutional amendment or a bylaw or whatever party business. And we could have worked those in. But that didn't happen. And it became very clear early on, especially because we got a delay with the issues that we talked about, with the sheer volume of races. And after the first ones went through and we saw like people weren't dropping off in the big races as quickly as we were thinking that they may, it's like, we have to get through the races, because the worst thing that would have happened for the party is if we go the whole day and we have to adjourn and we hadn't even finished all of our nominating.
Right.
That would have been detrimental and provided fodder for people who hate the caucus convention system. I refused to do that. And so I erred on the side of we have to get through the elections versus the business. But I'll tell you, I love doing business. You guys have seen me as the chair at SEC meetings. Like, I try to encourage people to get through business. I'm a believer, like, whether you like the outcome or not, whether it's your preferred bylaw change or not, let's discuss it. Let's consider it. Let's vote for it.
Yeah.
I did hope, and I really tried to get through that one final piece. And I had said, hey, let's get this through that would allow us to consider constitutional or platform changes during the organizing years. And that was the next item of business we were going to do immediately after the Senate race was done. And I tried to express this to folks from the floor. And I said this during the convention, but a lot of folks, I mean, it's a long day, right?
Right.
A lot of folks missed what the issue was. And what that was is I became aware as we were approaching midnight, I became aware that if we were still in the meeting as we passed the midnight hour, we were going to have like this massive fee. I can't remember exactly what the dollar amount was, but it was like a $15,000 or $18,000 or $20,000 fee and penalty.
Oh, wow.
Top of the cost of everything.
If we went over.
And so that's where suddenly it's like, yeah, it only would have taken us 10 minutes or so to consider this final bill. But here we were like 15 minutes to midnight. And if we weren't done and like getting out of there, suddenly we were going to incur this massive cost. And that just, I couldn't justify, especially as I knew we were going to go into this posture of trying to help our convention members. To then encumber the party further with a giant unanticipated fee on top of things, didn't make sense. So again, these are all lessons learned, and you learn from them and you plan to mitigate those. I'm very confident for all of you delegates listening, this convention is going to be a lot smoother in time. So don't get discouraged. It's not going to be until midnight. For a couple of reasons. We have fewer races, obviously. There's not going to be as many rounds of voting because there's not as many candidates. There's not as many races. The venue is better.
Right.
We've planned from the lessons that we've learned of what worked, what didn't work. So this should be a very smooth process. But the final thing that I really want to highlight from the state convention last year, there we were at 11 o'clock at night, and we had most of our delegates there.
Oh, yeah.
I'll tell you, I was on that stage all day long. And I was inspired time and time again throughout the day, but it really culminated with like fairly little drop off until the very end. And yeah, it was a lot of time, and I appreciate the countless hours given by all of these delegates, but it was an inspiring expression of the American system and certainly the delegate process.
Yep.
Yeah,
Awesome.
I agree. I thought it was inspiring. I looked across and I went, oh my goodness, they've all stayed.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. That was cool.
And, you know, it's funny because people, they're like, well, that's a really long day. But the thing is the energy's high. People are, they're involved and they're engaged and they care about what's going on. I would definitely like to see us get to more party business that has to happen at the conventions. Hopefully that happens this time. But the other thing, and I was talking to Cristy about this the other day, is that particular constitutional amendment that allows us to do party platform amendments in the organizing convention, I realized that if we, because we've been gone through this whole process with our platform.
Yeah.
If we can set up the platform in the organizing year, it sets the tone for the nominating year and tells all the delegates, these are the things we're going to stand on. This is the truth that we've all agreed on for the party. You may agree with 95% of it, so go ask about that 95%. But we're staying on top of the things that are relevant issues, and we're gonna march forward with this. And so then it colors that whole next year for the nominating year. And so I would love to see that change. But
me too.
Well, just for your awareness and all of the delegates, I agree that should be considered. And so even though there isn't a way to consider platform amendments, I allowed those to be submitted this year, because we have that constitutional amendment change, and we will consider that earlier on in the business of the state convention on May 17th. And if that were to pass, we will then on the agenda have the conditional consideration of platform amendments that
because it goes into effect immediately.
Correct. And so again, I care about business. I like doing the business. I want the party to be as efficient as possible. So we allowed for that submission. And I specifically directed the convention committee and the parliamentarian that will accept those on a provisional basis. They'll be added to the agenda that should that constitutional amendment be adopted, then those would go into effect on the agenda to be considered.
Good.
So you've mentioned the SCC a few times. We should probably explain what the SCC is. A lot of people are familiar with it if they're on a county central committee, right? It's kind of the same idea except for the state. And you can give people more context for that. But some of the SCC meetings have been rather painful to sit through, I would say. You're smiling like yes, I know. So
sometimes they feel like an ambush too. It's like, oh, what curveball is going to be thrown just to see what happens. It's like, okay.
So, yeah, sometimes it feels like that's happening, or people will stand up and they'll take advantage of Robert's rules to kill time, or they'll attack things or whatever. But the thing that, because initially I was like, well, why doesn't the chair just say, okay, your time's up, sit down, shut up, it's somebody else's turn? But then I was thinking, yeah, but if I have a legitimate concern, I do have the right to say something in the meeting as a member. So how do you balance that out? And how do you make the SCC meetings run so we can get the business done? Because like the last few, we've had so many things on the agenda that have just piled up that we haven't been able to get through. And so you want to get stuff done, you want to keep the meeting moving, but everybody does have the right to speak. So how do you juggle that?
Yeah, I think a couple of things. First, what Cristy talked about earlier in our conversation today of becoming chair, and you suddenly realize a lot of things that you're not familiar with, and you learn and you grow. Certainly, I understand Robert's rules better today than I did 2 years ago.
Yeah, Cristy breaks ties for me on stuff.
I understand what works in the conversation better now than I did before. I came into the chair's position, and I tried to get kind of a feel from my own experience, but also talking with people that had either a little bit or a long-term experience in party activism or party leadership. And one of the concerns that a lot of folks had expressed to me was that the chair in the past, and not necessarily even maliciously, but the chair had seemed to be heavy-handed on trying to drive outcomes. And so I had made the decision to try to do all that I could to just create that level space where it wasn't driving my priority or something else. And I'll tell you, one of the few authorities that the chair has is setting the agenda order. Well, let me tell you how I set the order. I did it based off of the order of which people submitted things.
Right.
It wasn't like my preference. It was, okay, this person submitted this before this person, so I'll put it there. Now, I made a couple of exceptions. So, for example, if there was something that had been considered before and we had been wrestling with it as an SEC, I would tend to keep that up higher, even if somebody had submitted something before when you have a new submission, because we've been working on this. Let's move that. Or if something had a timeliness or an urgency to it, it's like, okay, we have to make a decision on this to move forward with caucus preparation. That has to go at the top of the agenda.
Yeah.
But when you're getting to just like, hey, here's 5 different things that are worth considering, I did it based off of the order of when people put it in. I also didn't dive into reading the documents prior to putting out the agenda. So it's not even my bias. It's like, no, I reviewed all of that after I had submitted the agenda. And sometimes it's like, oh man, I really hate that, or I really like that. But that didn't weigh into how I did it, because I was trying to, again, keep my hand off the scale and not just force an outcome. I probably did that to an extreme that could be scaled back and still be sincere with like, hey, it's about a fair process. There's probably a little bit more direction that could be given. There's definitely some political or parliamentary games that were, I think at times intentionally, but oftentimes maybe unintentionally played out, that you talked about, of kind of wasting time, or somebody brings something up where it's like, oh, I've never heard about that. I'm relying on the parliamentarian to give direction on that. Once you experience it, you understand it a little bit better.
Right.
So again, I'm better equipped now. But I think the biggest thing that has to happen for the SEC, the State Central Committee, to be more effective is we have to have a cultural shift. And I'll tell you, I've been on the SEC now as chair for 2 years. 2 years prior to that, I was just a member. And then the 2 years prior to that, I was a member for a couple of months. And then I filled the vice chair vacancy. So 6 years I've been on the state central committee as a voting member. And then as a member of Senator Lee's team, I was sometimes his proxy representative here and there over the course of 10 years prior to that. So I've seen it for a long time. And I would say that the last 2 years, where you maybe felt like, oh man, we're in a bad place. I hate to tell you that
it's not the worst it's been.
It's not the worst it's been, and it's not all that much of an outlier. I think we're just kind of right here, but I would say our potential is clear up here.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. That's why I'm so frustrated.
Potential is massive.
Yeah.
So that's what I think we collectively need to do. And I think a powerful thing, both of you are running unopposed. So you are going to be the vice chair and the chair of Utah County. You both have automatic seats on the state central committee. I think relying on voices like the two of you and others who have now experience and also believe that we have a ton of potential have to be a big part of that conversation. And should I be elected to continue in this role, early on, it's going to be a matter of training, setting expectations. And it's not, hey, here's my expectation. It's collectively, let's have the conversation. What do we expect from our time of service? What do we as an SEC expect from meeting our potential? And I think if we set some of those goals collectively and then hold one another to account for that, not in a combative way, but in a collaborative way, I think we can start to see the State Central Committee getting back to a place where it's effective and it becomes a big part of adding to that carrot of showing the force multiplier good that the party can be. And where appropriate and necessary, it can also be the stick that is actually listened to instead of completely ignored by people outside of the seats.
Yeah, I just want to say that I think that the one of the biggest things that we identified, you mentioned culture, that's one of the two that I see. On our county level, we do not have the obstacle that the state level has where they have to adopt the agenda. So we do not have to adopt the agenda. And I know that a lot of people have voiced concern about having the state drop that rule so that because sometimes then it becomes the battle of just the adoption of the agenda.
And people lose steam. If you suddenly had a 2-hour battle to even start the meeting and you're thinking, man, I've already missed my kid's Little League game. I'm probably going to miss the University of Utah or the BYU football game. And do I really want to be here? I think it puts a person into a posture of instead of being excited and enthusiastic about being there, they're just thinking, oh, when's this going to end? As soon as most of the people in the room are in that place of when's this going to end, they lose sight of doing the best work that they can do. But it's also like, oh, let's just lose quorum or let's vote to adjourn. We're not going to do that. We'll just take care of that down the road.
Right.
And I think if you keep people enthusiastic, you can do more in 2 hours than a bunch of like disheartened people can do in 5 hours. You got to keep people excited and enthusiastic.
Well,
what was the other one though, Cristy? You said you had 3. So culture, the adopting the agenda. I'd be interested on what your
one. Oh shoot! While you were talking, it was on it. Chuck can make his comment. It'll come back to me. There was a third one though that
we could talk after too, but I'd just be interested in learning and hearing ideas on things that we could do to improve this.
Yeah, have Chuck. It's been a week of not sleeping since our conventions on Saturday. It'll come back to me.
Yeah. Speaking of venue juggling, but anyway, my thought was just along the same lines of what you're saying. I have the most energy at the beginning of the meeting. And if you can set the kind of the pace and the feeling at the beginning of the meeting, a lot of times I can hold on to it for the entire meeting, right? And so that's where the adopting the agenda thing is just so hard. But then the other thing is that then I see the next thing coming up, and I know it's important, and and I'll go up there and I'll fight to the best of my ability, anyway, if I feel like it's something that matters to that level. But sometimes I'm like, I'm gonna go home and I'm gonna crash hard after this because I've already spent a ton of energy and now I know I have to spend more, and I'm not excited for the thing that's 5 things down, even though I care about it because I'm running out of steam. And so I get up and I sacrifice for it anyway. And then, I come home and my wife's like, how was your meeting? I'm like,
well, and again, I said this at the very onset of our conversation today. We need to keep in mind what our enemy is.
Yeah.
And what are we fighting against? And what are we trying to protect? And sometimes state central committee and county central committee and delegate meetings or meetings with elected officials, we approach them like boxing matches.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Fight for what you believe in. Don't bend on what you believe in. Defend what you believe in, even if the fellow Republican thinks something else. But I don't think we need as many boxing matches, and we can be more collaborative and yet still firm in principle. And we can have the debate.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not saying no debate. I'm not saying like, oh, consensus for consensus sake. Please be clear. Like,
that's the Democrats.
Yeah.
But, yes, it is. We don't have to have the vitriol in the boxing match. Let's approach with one another, and we can do a lot of stinking good. Because you talked about before, sometimes there's this concern of when there's just one strong party, that you have this concern of like a lack of transparency and like the shenanigans behind the scenes. You also have another challenge when you have a strong uniparty, is people then get wrapped around axles that ultimately actually don't matter for protecting our country and our state's future and our kids' future. But they feel really important because it's the debate between a fellow Republican and we have our ardent disagreement. I would encourage all of us to ask the question, what's going to win the race next year? What's going to flip Salt Lake County from blue to red? What's going to protect Utah from ever turning blue? What's going to keep at bay the Democrat woke nonsense that's trying to indoctrinate and infiltrate my kid's life?
Yeah.
Like, that's what the party should be doing first and foremost. We can do the other stuff too. But if all of our energy is focused on that thing that ultimately doesn't affect that, however important it may be, we've left all of that to happen to us rather and to react to, rather than to be proactive against.
Yeah. Well,
I remember it.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay. So there is 4. Chuck and I came up with another one with the pre-SEC meetings in our county to make sure that everybody had the discussion beforehand. But the other one was the quorum threshold. And so I am of the opinion after watching it. So culture not having to adopt the agenda, and I'm sure somebody's going to call me after this podcast and explain to me why that's a really critical piece. But from what I saw,
there are
it was
trade-offs.
a stalemate. There are, and then the quorum threshold, because I think if we lower the quorum threshold, then people have to stay, because then whatever faction they belong to is like, oh wait, I can't leave, or the other factions will have more of a quorum, right? So if you lower the threshold, because right now it's relatively high, and so people use it in
they use it
as a tactic,
weapon.
as a weapon, and they will get up and leave, and then the quorum's not there, and then we have to call for quorum, and then we got to count. But if the quorum were lower, I actually think it would incentivize each group to stay, because if they were all to leave, then you'd be like, well, I know what they want, and our group doesn't want that. And if we all leave, then they're going to get their way. And so I think it actually has the opposite effect. So quorum threshold, I would like to see reduced. But
I really like the pre-meetings, and we tried to do those on the state level of letting people go through in a Zoom call fashion. The sponsors of each of the proposals can explain their business, just to inform folks. So it's not a debate. We're not weighing in. It's not arguing over the pros and cons. It's just like, oh, Chuck, you introduced this bylaw proposal, explain it to folks. So then people could do some of that beforehand. If the counties also did their pre-meetings and the state continues to do that, which I would plan on doing, I think we can get to a place where a lot of like that back and forth trading and discussions and, oh, I hadn't thought about it that way, let's make an adjustment. You could handle that beforehand, and then the efficiency of the meeting goes exponentially.
Aaron Boland did at the Provo meeting, he did a Q&A, like, here's some common questions and answers about this in case you're not familiar.
Oh, that was attached to the amendment.
Yeah, and it was super helpful. So we actually took a page out of that book, and with this platform changes, we did a question and answer, like common question answers that we know are going to come up just about this. What is it? What's the timing? Why is this relevant? And it just adds more context to it.
Well,
so
Aaron, as the Constitution and Bylaws Chair, he did a lot to elevate some of that. And I mean, I think the work he did was invaluable in providing all of the state central committee members a chance to really, and his whole committee, there's a committee of a number of folks there. They did the work that then better equipped people. So all of these are things that I think we could do. But kind of circling back to the initial question, I don't think we're as much of an outlier. The potential is so high, and this is everything in the Republican Party in all aspects: state central committee, what we expect from candidates, what we expect from elected officials, donors, grassroots. Our potential, we're not meeting it. Not even in Utah. When we do a lot of good, we're not quite there yet. So we have a lot of work to do, but I'm excited to see what happens in the delta between where we're at now, the high watermark, and the new potential high watermark and everything that we try.
Yeah. When you talk about potential too, and this is something that Cristy and I are going to be talking about at our convention, right, is just once you get all of these things unified, right? So maybe you have a party chair that's heading in that direction. You have an SEC that's heading in that direction, and the legislature maybe is more over here. And you kind of stack it on this, the county parties kind of fall in here. And but the thing is everything's pointed upward mostly. And so when we're pulling along the same way, a ton of stuff happens. But then let's say that, Rob Axson, if you get elected, or Phil, if he gets elected, right, you get hit by a bus. And now we've got a chair that instead of pointed this way is kind of pointed this way. If everybody else is still pointed up, we still pull them up. Yeah. And so that's the thing that I think is our biggest problem is it's not SB 54. It's not the legislatures that aren't, in line with what the delegates or the people of the state want. It's not any of those things. It's that we're not all lined up. And so, when you're talking about, so we need a culture change in the SEC, and we need to get some of these things going the same way, right? The pre-SEC meetings for the county parties, right? That points it kind of in the right direction. We're not telling people what to think, but we're kind of orienting and saying, I think we all agree we're kind of this. Mm-hmm. And that's where the potential that I see is that all of a sudden now the SEC doesn't have to be the force that pushes through whatever obstacle we have on its own. Neither do the county parties. Neither do you. Neither does anybody else. It's all of us together, and we can easily break through it together.
It's the polling rather than the pushing.
Yeah, but I think there's work to be done there. So anyway, I'm going to get back to some of these other questions. I know we've gone a long time.
And if I've repeated myself, I apologize. Sometimes I'm having deja vu. Like, did we talk about this before?
Yeah.
The recording didn't work, or did we talk about it today?
You can edit all of my comments out to save
time. I have a pretty good idea of what we talked about and what we haven't. So I've got two more on here, and then I want to talk about caucus. I don't actually have a question about caucus on here, and the reason I left it off is because the county parties mostly, right? You did some stuff to support us, which was important, but then most of the execution was here. Yeah. But I would like to ask you about it because you keep bringing it up, and I'm like, he has something to say here, and if you have something to say, I want to hear it.
Yeah. No.
In fact, let's just go ahead and do that.
Do caucus real quick. You can't support the delegates if you don't support the caucus. That's where the delegates come from, right?
Yeah.
And you can't support the caucus convention system unless you recognize where the origination point is. Mm-hmm. And I actually don't think that the origination point is caucus night. The origination point in a 2-year cycle is actually this year. It's right now. Mm-hmm. This summer during municipal election years, county precincts and Republican state delegates and party faithful and grassroots, we need to be engaging in our municipal elections. We need to be finding good Republican candidates. It's the perfect excuse. Plus in the summer, perfect weather to do a fireworks barbecue or something at your house in your neighborhood. Start organizing the precinct. Mm-hmm. As you organize the precinct, it's the best vehicle to disseminate information before caucus, to invite people out to actually know, hey, is that somebody who's just trying to infiltrate our process because they want to take advantage of us and they actually hate us? And they're claiming they're a Republican, but they actually hate us. That's very different than somebody who, I've never been politically active before. I think I mainly agree with the Republican Party, but I'm kind of, I don't know. That's awesome. That's a potential convert.
Yeah.
Or I experienced a thing that I didn't like, and so now I've got to figure out how to make sure that doesn't happen again to anybody else. We get a lot of those people.
I think COVID lockdown.
Yeah.
That the COVID experience.
Oh yeah.
Did a lot of political activism in this country that has been beneficial for the Republican Party.
Oh, absolutely.
Yep.
Robert Kennedy is Secretary of Health and Human Services because of COVID.
Well, that aside, you had people whose businesses were shut down. You had people who, they watched their families drift away from the church they care about. You had, all of these things that, in my opinion, are detrimental to our society. Yeah, came out of that.
Yep, 100%. And so that creates an opportunity for us, though, to reconnect. Connection is something that I've always cared deeply about, the idea of building relationships. And it's why I'm not a bomb thrower. thrower. It's why I try to work with people when we agree on something, even though we adamantly disagree on other issues. Because connection creates a space where you do have that alignment to move forward together. Let's start this year in a municipal election year to use that as an excuse. Use that neighborhood barbecue as an excuse. Start getting to know your neighborhood. Start organizing that neighborhood from the political party perspective. And then we deploy that at caucus night.
Mm-hmm.
So, like you said, caucus is by and large, it's effectuated by the counties. They pair it, they plan it, they determine where they're doing it, their venues,
Mm-hmm.
their preparation looks like. And it serves a purpose for the counties and it serves a purpose for the state. So it organizes, of course, the precinct. It elects county delegates, and then for the state's benefit, it elects state delegates. And in a presidential election year, if we decide to do a presidential preference poll through the state election mechanism, then it doesn't affect us at caucus. Or if we decide to do it at caucus like we did last year, and the presidential preference poll is there, that's another element that's for the state.
Right.
So, looking at it, what I did in the past that we had never done before is in the past, the state party had paid for some county parties to have yard signs, and we did that again.
Mm-hmm.
I think
we appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to. I always wanted to back you guys up.
Thank you.
I think, like we talked about before, a collaborative effort between the counties and the state, that's how we're successful. And so the state party has always paid for some of those signs. We did that same thing. And I think we actually paid for more of the signs than the state party had ever done in dollar amount. But beyond that, we then deployed a number of things. So for the first time ever, we actually spent substantial investment in advertising caucus. So from radio ads to billboards, to banner ads and digital ads, to some texting campaigns and different things that we did. We were north of $50,000 that we spent advertising caucus. We then had our system of credentialing and getting people in and that pre-registration. And that one created a little bit of a headache when we had a denial of service attack. So a DOS attack, it's a hacking attack where they actually overwhelm your system. Even though we had kind of prepared for it, they went well above and beyond. And ultimately it was like they were creating a DOS attack by having like a couple million people, what the computers think are people, trying to do the system at the exact moment, overwhelm the system, and they closed it down for 20 minutes. But let me tell you some of the benefits from that. Well, one, we learned what worked and what didn't work, and what worked was phenomenal. I mentioned before, we went from 14,000 emails when I first started to now 140,000 emails. Well, 70,000 of those emails that we just added to all of our data came from caucus night pre-registration. We also had multiple, I can't remember the exact number, so I don't want to say, but it was no small number. It was hundreds of people who were members of other parties who we were able to turn away because when they went to do the pre-registration, it's like, no, you're a registered Democrat. You are ineligible to participate in our caucus. So from an election integrity perspective, keeping those folks from participating where in the past they were able to. So incredibly invaluable data and resources that came from that. But again, there were some lessons learned in some counties, like in Salt Lake County where I live. I think one of the lessons that we come out of that from last time, and we'll work with Mike Carey and his team to implement this a little bit differently, is we need a few more venues. There were too many precincts put into each of the venues, and with the substantial, wonderful turnout that we had, it was just too much. Like at the school that I went to at Brighton High School, there were just too many people in the commons area. It wasn't even like, oh, the pre-registration system didn't work as well as it needed to be, or we didn't have enough volunteers. There were just too many people. So that's an easy one to now learn and realize, like, hey, the caucus system is still vibrant. We need more venues. So you book more schools. All of that, though, that then sets the stage. The more representation that we have and buy into the delegates, it's harder for people to criticize the caucus convention system and our delegate system. When it's like, no, these delegates, you don't like them? You don't think they represent the party? Well, they represent their neighborhood. And there were plenty of people there that it's clear that they represent their neighborhood. And that's a republic, folks. Like, embrace it.
Yeah. It was so ironic that, well, you and I talked about the numbers being upwards of 100,000 across the state.
Yeah, we had about 110,000 people across the state that participated.
Which is like secondary
I'm trying to imagine that many people in one place.
Well, what it is the it's the second largest private event that happens in the state. And the first is the predominant religions conference.
Yep.
Yeah. So we're the second largest.
And those now happen in it. You just watch it from home.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
This you're actually having to bring the neighborhood together.
Yeah, you just turn on the TV.
So I found it super ironic. We did not have some of the issues in Utah County, and that was due to our really good house chairs. They were stacking an electronic with a paper solution with an electronic with a paper. So we had some backups that I think other places didn't have. And I give all credit to our seasoned house chairs for having the wisdom to do that. But I thought it was super funny that the news kept saying that the caucus was dead, and then they kept showing pictures of crowds that couldn't be processed. So I was like, which is it? Did no one show up, or did too many people?
Nobody cares about this system. Which one is it?
I know.
Yes.
I thought that was so funny.
It was absolutely fascinating. And then, of course, the criticism. Let me say, if you were one of the people who showed up and it was too many people and you didn't feel like you got to participate, well, you had a bad experience. So for that Republican, that individual, they had a bad experience. We have to learn that lesson.
Yes.
But for the vast majority of people who participated in the vast majority of counties, they had a wonderful experience. And here's something that's fascinating. At Brighton High School, where I was, like I said, it was overwhelmed with the number of people that were coming to that venue in that space. And I heard that some people turned away, and that's unfortunate that they decided to turn away. That was their choice. Nobody was turned away, but they decided, hey, I don't want to wait. But I'll tell you, even with that being too many precincts at that one location, how much time from the backup lines to being credentialed to doing your caucus and having the elections and voting in the presidential preference poll and leaving and going home. How much time was it? It was only 2.5 hours.
Yeah.
And that was if you got there at the worst time. A lot of folks, they came in and they were done in 2 hours. So I look at it in 2.5 hours. Okay, let's try to improve that. But really, once every 2 years, you gave 2.5 hours of time to express your political participation and to create vibrancy in the dialogue and the discussions and process of deciding who represents you in a country that gives us so much.
Yeah.
Yep.
Like this country gives us so much, even with our flaws.
Yeah.
2.5 hours is too much time for you.
Yeah.
I think we need to start talking about it a little bit differently. I think we need to expect a little bit more from ourselves and from our neighbors and from society. Like, hey, I can give 2.5 hours every 2 years to nurture the best country in the world.
And something that affects and touches every area of my life, you know. Chuck and I were the help desk for Utah County. And so we were stationed at my house at the kitchen table, working with you guys. And so we got
a lot of late night calls. I remember
we had a handful. Yeah.
Where you at?
So we ended up, when things kind of died down, took our phones with us, and we went over to Mountain Ridge Junior High. We went to Lone Peak High School. It was awesome. We saw wonderful meetings with groups of people having great discussions about what their principles were. And we took pictures, and we probably saw, I don't know, maybe 10 in action. It was great. So from that to then, you know, what we saw on the news or people's experience, and I'm not taking away from that. There were some trials that night, but yeah, I get really, people will go to every single play that their kid is in for 5 days in a row, or they won't miss a single soccer game. And rightfully so, as we should. But this is something that touches every area of your life, you know, from your medical to your private property rights, you know, to your car, to your taxes, to every single thing. And I think, maybe we've got to do a better job. There are some communication things on our end that I know that we can clean up. But I do feel like some of the criticisms have been erroneously put upon the party. But
no, 100%. And you take those outlier experiences that, while legitimate for them, but extrapolating that and saying, oh, every one of the 110,000 people that participated in caucus had a bad experience. That's not accurate.
Can I tell you one more thing? I recently had a conversation with some people that are very They're very supportive of doing away with the caucus system. And they said, well, it's a problem when you have these people who are really active that they go every 2 years and they get reelected. And so if I wanted to, I would have to contact, 10 of my neighbors and get them to go too. And I said, okay, counter to what? Counter to if you wanted to work really hard in like a House district race and you had to knock 40,000 doors. Like, this is where, government is at your neighborhood. It seems a little easier to go find 10 people in my neighborhood that have similar ideas than to go knock 40,000 doors, to see if I want to affect a certain district. And so I think sometimes we will throw the baby out with the bathwater because we'll find an outlier of something that's not perfect. And I want to say over and over, yes, this is life. There's no utopia. You will always find some sort of an outlier where something wasn't perfect, but you have to ask compared to what?
Yeah.
Compared to what? And it is a much better system compared to anything else that I have found. And when you say it's the number one, that you can think of, no, it really is. Like, I think it was you and I that had a conversation, or Wendy Hart, about what was left in the United States of like true caucus systems, where it was like right at your neighborhood, and we're it.
Yep.
Like, we are it. We're what's left of the original.
Where it started. It started in Green Dragon Tavern. Like, this is literally caucuses and people coming together and having discussions.
Yeah.
This is what was the start of the revolution.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah.
And not that we need to be in a revolution posture, but we should take that same degree of urgency and devotion to this idea that we're protecting things. But what I would encourage folks to do is ask that question. If they're weighing like, hey, why do I care about the caucus system? Or do I like it? Do I not? That question that you posed of compared to what, ask that question as it pertains to the caucus convention system, but try to separate it from politics.
Yeah.
And what I mean by that is look at like Facebook and all of these social media platforms. I mean, how many hundreds of friends do you have? Are those really like hundreds of friends? Are you getting the same value of the relationship from those hundreds of friends that you got from 20 core close friends when we were growing up before social media? I would guess not. And you look in society, while we are so connected in some ways, we're actually disconnecting. And so the caucus convention system, aside from being phenomenal for the political process that we've talked about, encouraging people to get to know their neighbors, encouraging them to talk to their neighbors, encouraging them to invite their neighbors to come and participate once every 2 years in an hour to 2 hour, 2.5 hour long meeting, talking to them about, hey, I'm your delegate. Let me tell you what I've learned. Having those conversations at church or at the school soccer game or at church or at the grocery store or something. Like, those are elements that bring us back in true connection.
Yeah.
So in as much as the Republican Party of Utah can continue to help people reconnect, hey, I'll do that all day long.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The other thing that occurred to me the other day was that it's not just the connective tissue, it's what we connect about.
Yeah.
And you brought it up. You mentioned, hey, we're here for the ideas, the ideals in the platform. Right. And so a lot of times people are like, well, what are the delegates even trying to decide anyway? We're trying to decide, hey, look, we agreed on this charter of ideas, our platform. And so now we're trying to decide which people best represent that charter of ideas so we can get it put into law.
Yep.
I mean, if that's it, right? And so if you and I have most of the ideas in the platform in common, then you're part of the club. Come join in, right?
And the platform's only a couple pages.
And that's what we connect. But that's what we're there for. So that's what we connect over, right? And so, there was somebody that was going around the meetup, and he was saying, well, why can't you just accept the voice of the people over the party? Because if they're not given the convention's not given the same outcome as the primary, then what's the point? Because the voice of the people matters. And the reality is yes, the voice of the people matters. But the difference is that you have all of the people in the primaries who have all of the crap going on in their lives. They listen to sound bites on the news, and there are some people that are well informed, but none of them are going off of this charter of truths that we've adopted to say this is what we care about and these are the things we're going to fight for. And so if any of your things are in that platform, then you need to come work with us because we're all fighting for them too.
Yeah.
right? And so that's the whole crux of the thing, is then you build the connective tissue like we're talking about around these ideas, and we all pull together, right? And so like we were saying before, you're aligned here, I'm aligned here, somebody else is here, we're all pushing the same thing up the chain, and we're getting to that place where then I can live free, I know my kids can live free, they can make the decisions they want to live, right? They can live by the ideals that I'm teaching them or not, because they have their free agency, right? We don't have government encroaching on where I can live or what I can do or where I can worship or anything like that. And if, you brought up COVID, I mean, they infringed on basically almost all of that, right? And so that's what we're talking about. And so when you talk about the caucus system, we're not just getting together to do politics. And I think we've missed that message with people.
Yeah.
We're not getting together to do politics. We're getting together because we agree on these things as true. And so we're going to get together and we're going to do those, and we're going to find other people to do those, because we don't have time to go be the legislature ourselves.
Yeah.
We don't have time to be the governor ourselves. We don't have time to be the school board ourselves. And so we're going to find people that line up with those truths, and we're going to do truth. That's where we're going.
Yeah. And I've met a lot of people who they do their due diligence. They will send the emails, for the primary, and they will look at the websites. But you're right. And I'm going to start asking that question, because they'll come back and they'll say, what's the difference? And the primary needs to, and the same thing with the outcomes. And I'm going to start asking the question, as a whole with that candidate, did you compare them? Did you compare where they're at against our party platform?
Mm-hmm.
Because that is truly the difference. And we're looking at the collective of and not everybody is 100%, especially when we're looking at incumbents, but how well will you defend our party platform?
Right. Yep.
And we never ask that question. People just say, well, they didn't match up, which is it's such a logical fallacy to say that they are supposed to match up. And honestly, if anybody wants to read, Kirby Glad did a great article, an op-ed that starts, that is the exact question that the entire article is about. What if the convention results do not match the primary results? And he answers that question very well.
He does.
I recommend reading that.
All right. I'm going to divert us back onto these questions. This one, I think you'll be able to answer quickly relative to some of the other ones, but where's the party financially, and what are we doing to make it better?
Yeah, great question. Again, it needs to be about the trajectory and then what you do with that. The goal can't just be, we have a lot of money, or we're well funded. What are you doing with those funds? So when I came in, there's two different accounts. You have a federally compliant account, so FEC regulated. That's what you would use for like U.S. Senate congressional races or supporting presidential candidates or things. And then you have a state account that is managed by state law. And between the two, I think we had like $4,000 in one and $10,000 in another, or right around there. $15,000 to $20,000 in the account. I'd have to go back and look for specifics, but since that point, we've been able to raise north of $2 million directly for use for the party here, and right around $3 million total when you're including a bunch of fundraising we did with joint fundraising agreements to support President Trump and some other, like winning back the Senate, winning back the House races. In other states. We also did a joint fundraising agreement. I offered that to each of the congressional candidates. Mike Kennedy, for example, took us up on that. We were able to raise an additional $50,000 for his campaign through a joint fundraising agreement. So that falls into some of that delta that gets us to $3 million. So this is new high water marks for the party. We've been able to raise more money with the things that I put into place over the last 2 years. And that's how we've been able to, for the first time, give money to convention winners, for the first time, support convention winners with everything else, for the first time, advertise caucus, for the first time, do a bunch of things that we just never had the resources to do before. So again, I'm proud of the amount of money I've been able to help raise, but that is not the goal. That's the vehicle.
Right.
Funds are the vehicle to do the goals. So where we go from here, we have to continue to build on that, because that's how we grow the carrot that we've talked about. Mm-hmm. You build the influence of the party. You build the ability for the party to showcase that it's a force multiplier that you would be foolish to ignore. and that you can be benefited by tremendously in your life or in your candidacy or in your role as an elected official by leaning into the party because we have these resources for good. Think about the work that we did up at the legislature. If we had more funds to then go and actually educate not only legislators, but public policy around, like, this is why the party's concerned about this, or this is why the party supports that. All of that costs money. That's what I'm wanting to do these next 2 years, is to continue that trajectory of raising funds and then be doing more good with it. One thing that I'll tie in here that I think is important when you're talking about resources. The party is 20 or 30 years away from not existing at all if we're not bringing in and passing the baton to young, new Republicans. So we're all aging out, right? Every year that goes by, we get closer to the grave. That's how time works. And every year that goes by, the party is losing its number of faithful and activists and grassroots and donors and candidates if we're not replacing them. And you can either replace them by getting converts, bringing them in from a horizontal direction, or bringing in new people as they age into being politically active or as they become of age to vote, making sure that they understand the principles of free markets, the principles of liberty, the principles of our foundational documents, not in the party, in the country, understand why the country was a republic, and then let them see, oh, the Republican Party is the vehicle that's accomplishing all of that. Well, I think there's a lot we can do with additional funding to advertise, to communicate, to train, to educate, and then to appropriately push back. We know with the activist judicial decisions that we've had here in Utah of late, Utah is now ground zero and a target for a tremendous amount of ballot initiatives. The party needs to be in a place to articulate to people why they are playing with fire if they go and sign on to a ballot initiative or vote for something that is going to go and destroy Utah. All of this is going to require money. I have a plan to continue this trajectory of not just resting on what we've accomplished over the last 2 years, which, like I said, is a new high watermark, but I'm excited to double that. And that's going to be where, again, legislatively, as we're changing things, they'll look and it's like, oh, the party, they actually have a big chunk of change to play around with. I want to play with that.
Makes sense.
Because if not, you described California.
Oh, and they're reckoning themselves on the ballot initiatives there too.
So keep in mind, in the entire country, a country of 50 states, there's only like 22 states that have ballot initiative process where you can kind of circumvent the principle of a republic and just do direct democracies through ballot initiatives. But among those 20, there's only 3, California, Arizona, and now Utah, that there is no restraint and guardrail around a ballot initiative, which means any amount of out-of-state money and even out-of-country money. You could literally have what happens in Maine and what happens in California. You can have money that originates from China or from Russia that is coming in and messing with our system of government. How foolish a situation that we find ourselves in, and we have to push back against that. A well-funded Republican Party can be the tip of the spear to help push back against that.
Well, and I'll just play the devil's advocate, only speaking for myself. I don't want to include you guys in this comment, but this ties back to SB 54, and the frustration has been that the initiative has been the potential check on bad legislation that has been passed, and people have gone in very frustrated tone saying, what do we do when we can't get these people out of office, yet they're passing legislation that's wrecking us? And we're guilty of that as Republicans as well. And so back to having a process that comes from the grassroots, that comes from your precinct all the way up through the party, where you have a say and we have less influence with power and money, then that initiative process will be less appealing, and it should be less appealing.
I completely agree. I do think it's important to recognize the difference, though, between an initiative and a referendum.
Oh, totally. Totally.
And there's good in both, and there's bad in both, but initiative has way more bad. And,
I agree.
A referendum, just for folks who might not be familiar with the delineation there, that's where the legislature does something and you come back and say, no, we don't like that. Put a pause on that, cancel that, change that. And so you're providing that check. And an initiative, you're actually passing a law. And what the courts did last summer is they said, unlike the past where the interpretation was that in our state constitution, the people have the ability to do initiatives to pass law. But just like laws can be changed, if a law is passed by Congress today and tomorrow they contradict themselves, they can change law. that's how it had been interpreted. So the people pass a law through initiative, and then adjustments could be made through the legislative process and through the republic that we have. What the court said is, oh no, the legislature can't change anything from the initiative process of the people. Where's the check? Well, what you do to protect a republic, checks and balances. You have to have that. We've now lost that check with this new judicial interpretation.
Yep.
Yeah, it's scary.
Yeah, we're off on a tangent again, but I think it's important that people understand these things. One other question that I have is, it feels like a lot of times technology is either our best friend or our worst enemy, right? We either use it well or we don't. Sometimes not using it well means that somebody else who's not aligned with us uses it well and, benefits from it. But sometimes, like the caucus thing, with the distributed denial of service attack. And I'm not going to go into the technical details of that. That's my life, my work life. But, right. So that worked and it didn't, right? So how are we looking at taking better advantage of technology, both to get things going the way that we need to and use it as a tool and not kind of hang ourselves up on it?
Yeah, it has to be a give and take and a learning iterative process. So you have to learn from what works and replicate that, and you have to learn from what doesn't work. And so like on that DDoS attack, we are better equipped now to know, like, we did really good things to protect against that. We had one, and I don't want to talk about what it was because I don't want to give people ideas. We had one specific thing that just by a fluke, it triggered a reset. So that was what the delay. It wasn't that the DDoS was actually successful. It's that we had a protection put into place that triggers a reset when something is happening so that nothing bad can happen. But that created a 20-minute lack of access to the
right.
And this was done right at the wrong time. Whoever did this knew enough about Utah and understood Utah enough. This was an attack against the Utah Republican Party. This was an attack against the caucus system. This wasn't just some like North Korean hacker group that was trying to undermine America. No, this was an attack against us. They did it right at 6:40. And knowing that our 7 o'clock start time means most people are credentialing between 6 and 7. So you have to learn that. And now we know exactly how to make sure that doesn't happen, so you can learn from those things. But then there's other things. I think you rely on technology where technology is beneficial, but you don't become dependent on technology. So here's an example. Last year at the state convention, because of the number of races and rounds of voting that we were going to have, like we talked about earlier, we had to have an electronic solution. And we found the best one that we possibly could, but we could have gone to paper had the delegates wanted. Like I mentioned, we had preparation for that. That's not the case this year. And so for all of you state delegates, just so you're aware, if you haven't heard already, I directed the convention committee that we will be doing paper balloting for the races this year at the state convention on May 17th. And that's the example of, yes, technology is beneficial, but when you don't need the technology, don't become dependent on it. There's other things that you can do. But when you can benefit from technology or you need to use technology, do it the right way, be thoughtful about it, learn what works, what doesn't work, rely on additional thoughts and expertise, and never become hamstrung into thinking this is the only way to do it. You have to be willing to look at others.
Right. All right. The last question that I have, dang, we didn't get so deep and heavy that I had to ask a personal fun question, but maybe I'll do that anyway. So maybe this is the second to last question. A lot of times I talk to the delegates, and I think to a certain degree we feel this less in the county party than at the state party. But people essentially say, okay, we go out, we vet delegates, but we only really hear from the party when we're gearing up for caucus all the way through the election. And then we don't see the party do much of anything until the next election. So how do you combat that so that people understand, hey, look, the party does other things for you and it shows up in other ways, and make people aware, the delegates, the voters, the candidates, the legislators, everybody up and down the chain. How do you help them understand that the party's there the rest of the time too, doing stuff?
Great question. And Some of it is capacity. So circling back to the monetary side, as we build capacity, we'll be able to do more. So for example, we just launched our new website. So Utah GOP, it has a complete new facelift. There's actually an element that has not gone live yet that will have training components. So any Republican can jump in and there will be videos and trainings to figure out what does the platform mean? How do I get involved? How do I contact my legislator? How do I become a delegate? What is the caucus system? All of this is going to be there. So then you have to do PR, you have to do ad campaigns. Like there's all of those things that we're building capacity towards. But there's also an element to this that if I were just self-interested, I could have approached the last 2 years in a way that's just promoting the state party and promoting, oh, look at all that I've done as chair. But is that actually beneficial to rescuing Utah's future if it's about me?
Right.
No, it's not. Like 20 years from now, I hope nobody remembers my name that I was a party chair, because that doesn't matter. But I hope that the work that we did to build the party is still impacting people's lives in 20 years. And so that puts you in a different posture. If you're looking at it from just promoting yourself or looking at it from building the apparatus to be a force for good, it's different. And I've tried to always approach it from like, how do we build the system? Well, when you built the system correctly, when somebody's wanting to get engaged with the party, where should they be engaged? Should they be engaged with the state party?
Nope.
No, they should be engaged with you on the county. So for the last 2 years, every time that somebody has wanted to volunteer, every time that somebody has wanted to be engaged, we have directed them to their county. Because it's not about the state party. The state party will do the things that only the state party can do, but the state party is successful when the counties are successful, because where's the precinct? Right. It's on the county level. Yeah. Where do people know one another? In their neighborhoods.
Yeah.
So that's kind of this catch-22 when people are like, well, why haven't I heard from the state party? But man, it's great hearing from you guys at the county party. They might think that like, oh, something's not working. I hear that and I'm like, perfect. That's actually what we want, because that's where the rubber meets the road there on the county level. And so that's where we've been trying to focus. But beyond that, there's other measurables. If it's appropriate for folks to look into it, they'll see it and they'll be aware of it. Like we talked about engaging in the legislative process during the legislative session. I'll tell you, statewide, we had like around 30 or so active members of college Republicans statewide. When I came in, that was one of my priorities, was to engage with young people. And I'll tell you, with the exception of 2 campuses, we now have clubs that are all vibrant at every single one of our schools. The final 2 are coming online, one of which is actually Utah Valley University. They have a really good Turning Point chapter and a really good Young Americans for Freedom chapter that we kind of benefit from. They just haven't had a vibrant Republican club. That one's going to be coming online. And each of these clubs have dozens and dozens of active members. And so over the last 2 years, I've gone shooting with a number of them. Like, we'll invite them in. Hey, let's go to the shooting range. I've done that in partnership with Brad Bonham, has taken the lead on a lot of that. And it's just been fun to go and break bread with young people. Because I remember when I was like that lone Republican voice in a bunch of political science classes up at the PU. And realizing like, hey, we all started somewhere, and these kids are facing so much nonsense. So much garbage on college campuses. So that's been a priority. We've done a bunch of engagement into minority communities, the Hispanic community, our African-American communities, different church groups and religious groups. I've gone and gone to worship services at maybe a dozen different churches, some of them multiple times. I've been to synagogues, I've been to Sikh temples, I've been to Hindu temples, I've been to mosque, and you make the case everywhere. And I'm a big believer, like, if you believe in what the party stands for, you can defend that anywhere. And you can go and invite people anywhere. And so those are the things that the party's doing. We're just building capacity. And so if anybody feels like, hey, well, why do I only see them in elections? Well, out of necessity, that's where we're like front and center in people's mind. A lot of it also out of necessity, we need to be behind the scenes, but we're just building capacity. The other thing that I'll point out, that all of this, I think Utah's in this unique position to be really good at something, if we get our mindset in the right place. A lot of us have spent 2 years of our life outside of Utah doing something, trying to bring people along to something we believe and introduce them to something we believe, because it was important enough to us that we wanted to share that message. And it's not just the faith that I'm obviously talking about. It's not just my faith. There's people that do this in a bunch of ways: military service, other church or philanthropic activities where you're going and you're expressing something or serving people. I find it unfortunate sometimes when we as Utahns that have that tremendous benefit and asset as our culture then approach politics as a zero-sum game of a purity test. So if it's okay to try to bring converts in on the one hand, let's not be treating politics as a place to chase everybody away. I think if we do a little bit more to take the benefits of missionary work and apply that to party process, that's where we'll get a lot of people who right now it's I don't pay attention to politics. I don't have time for that. I just want to watch TV, go to the game, take care of my kids, work and do my thing. Well, most Americans, that's the position they're in. Relatively few of us are actually engaged consistently. But the better we are as a party, we'll get more of those people off the couch. And think about the talents those people have that we just haven't tapped into yet.
So what are you going to do then? Because you did talk about you want them engaged more at the county level. What do you do to support the county parties?
So what we've done so far and what I've done over the last 2 years is, in my mind, that's just kind of the foundation. That's just where we're starting. Now let's build from there. So beyond funding in ways that we've never done before and trying to get you guys data. And I'll tell you, no county has come to me and said that they needed something. And I've said no. Now, sometimes I haven't been able to deliver what they wanted, but I've always, with that county chair leadership team, it's okay, let me think, let's see what we can do. And even you guys, it's hey, we need this, or can you help with funding here? Can you help with funding there? We've tried to step in and be sponsors or be supporters in every way, shape, and form. The thing that I want to execute next, and what we've been building these systems, like the data management and everything. And I mentioned earlier, candidates had access to the data until it was turned off if they didn't win at convention. Well, the next step to all of that is for every precinct chair to have all the information necessary to be the best, most organized precinct chair that they can be. And that's something that I think we will have in place to be able to be deployed by next year's election cycle. And so that will be coming from the top down, but handed to you. So for example, it's okay, Cristy, here you go. Here's Utah County's organization. And now, instead of you guys having to build your own system, you can have your own systems doing your thing.
Sure.
But it's here it is. You now have the ability to pull the trigger and activate on the precinct level so that the conversations, the relationships, the dialogue is happening. So what do you think that's going to do to engagement? What do you think that's going to do to bringing in new Republicans? What do you think that's going to do to keeping our Republicans in line with our understanding and supporting our platform? What do you think that's going to do to the caucus convention system? What do you think that's going to do to keeping elected officials focused on, hey, I need to represent this party because this party, while not perfect, is better equipped to actually fight for Utah's future. So I'm very excited about that next step that is the direct kind of concluding factor to what we've been trying to work on for the last 2 years. That's the next kind of chapter to really the state making you guys as effective as possible.
Yep.
Yeah. And even when all is said and done, if 2 years from now, all of that's happening and I still have somebody say, well, I haven't seen anything from the state party, I'll just smile and be well, keep working with your county. That's where you need to work.
There you go. Yeah. Well, we have a similar goal too. And I ironically got that exact same thing on social media 2 hours ago where someone said, that's a nice founding father quote, but what do you guys actually do to do anything? And I thought, where you been? But okay, I'll be nice about this. How can we help you? And where's your precinct?
Yep.
Yeah.
So,
totally.
All right. Well, is there anything else you want to bring up or ask?
Oh man. Yeah. Well, so we've got a couple of weeks. I think, is there one more convention after ours? We're on Saturday.
Yeah.
You're on Saturday.
And you guys are the 17th.
We're on May 17th. I think there's another one. I'd have to look on the calendar. But yeah, May 17th at Utah Valley University.
Okay. Do you know of any, you guys I've seen you do a couple of podcasts. You're going to some county stuff. You'll be at our convention. You'll also, Phil Lyman will be there as well. Chris Knoll will be there helping. I think Melanie will be there with a booth. And so we have a couple of things lined up. And so where else can people, get in touch with you and see you.
Yeah, great place for people to get in touch with me is go to robaxson.com. So ROBAXSON.com. You can kind of sign up for any type of updates. You can also send me a message. You can reach out to me. But I'm doing a Zoom call tomorrow. I'm doing multiple Zoom calls that are available to any delegate. I'm doing a bunch of in-person events. I really want to continue to learn from folks. It's not just a matter of like me answering questions and defending my record or helping explain why I did one thing and not another. Happy to do all of that. But even more beneficial than those elements, it's learning from delegates. There's a lot of people with great ideas of what we can do to kind of take the next stage. And so certainly looking forward to continuing those conversations. I've already been able to go to, I don't know, 15 or 16 different counties over the last couple of weeks, doing Lincoln Day dinners and county conventions and some other events and meet the candidate stuff. So looking forward to more of it. This is the process of a caucus convention system, right? You put in the miles and you do the hard work. And ultimately, I always just like to kind of ask that question of like, what's your motivation? What's our why? And we've talked about it a little bit. It's your kids, it's my kids. I assume Cristy's answer is the same, and most delegates' answer is the same. Like, truly, this is what matters.
Yeah, 100%.
I have 4 kids between the ages of almost 16 and almost 7. So, I've got 4 kids, 3 boys and a little girl, and they are my life. And then on those 5 people, there's nothing I wouldn't do for them. And my service in the party is a commitment to trying to elevate the quality of their life. And it's of course great to help other people too. But I figure in this one, if I'm selfish trying to focus on my family, everybody else's family is hopefully benefited too. And the same is true for you guys. So keep focusing on your family. Chuck, keep fighting for your family. I think that's where, if we hold to that, that's where the Republican Party is more likely to stay true to its core.
I love that so much. And I know we've gone so long, so I'm going to be super quick, but I have kids that are getting married, and one of my kids was joking and said, "Are you ready to be a grandma?" And I had this panic moment politically of like a next level of fighting for this stuff so that their individual rights can be, protected against the tyranny of government. And I went, oh my goodness. But I have, I think, Leah Hansen and her sister Tianu. And T was telling me at lunch one day that her parents, who are immigrants, I said, how'd you get involved? And she said, well, I wasn't involved before and Leah has been involved, but my parents, who are getting too old and have some health problems, sat me down and said, we're handing the baton to you to represent our family politically and to be active in this cause that has been so, wonderful in our lives. And they just love this country so much. They took it so serious that civic duty needed a family representative, and they handed the baton to her. She's telling me this at lunch and I'm crying because I I have the gene too. I'm feeling it as well. And I thought, what a beautiful thing. And this concept of like, who's your family's representative for freedom is a real thing, And so, my kids are going to have kids soon. And oh my gosh, I would like an exit ramp, but maybe there's not one. I don't know.
You gotta fight for it. I'm glad you brought those 2 sisters up. They work their tails off. They're tireless. And she's told me that same story, and you can tell how sincere it was for her, and she feels it. And that's the cool thing, is like her passion benefits my kids. Hopefully my passion benefits her family. Like, that's what we're all trying to do. And truly, like, what matters at the end of life? Like, truly what matters. It's your relationship with God, your relationship with your family. Like, that's it. And there's some other things like, were you a good person? Were you trustworthy and honest and all of that? Like, you can answer those questions, but really the only thing that I'll care about is my kids and my relationship with God. And what can we do between now and hopefully a long time down the road when we meet our maker to do the most to fight for those things and to benefit them.
Well, and to this point, because you brought up Leah, and I don't know her sister, but you brought up these parents that immigrated to the U.S., and it just made me think about the benefit of the people who have fought for these freedoms and these systems in the past. My grandfather immigrated to from Canada to the U.S., but his parents immigrated from England to Canada, right? And my grandmother, she joined the LDS Church in France and then immigrated through Argentina and Canada to come to the U.S. as well. And it's because those people stood up, and I'm sure they were thinking the same thing. I want to run my business the way I want. I want to take care of my kids the way I want. I want to stand up for these things, these truths, these freedoms, right? My family benefited directly, right? Yeah. And sure, there are some other instances in my family line where those kinds of freedoms were not defended, right? And so they wound up crossing the plains in covered wagons. But, whether you have the one heritage or the other, you have to recognize that it has this long-lasting effect, and it's not just for the people you care about, but it's people that you may wind up caring about, generations down the line, that, all of a sudden they marry into your family, or they become part of the fabric that we're all a part of. And so, yeah, I mean, I most immediately fixate on what this means for my kids. But the reality is that the difference we make here and the things that we figure out here, and if we can make the party into what it should be in Utah, we can spread that to Nevada, we can spread that to Arizona, we can spread that to Colorado. Can you imagine some of these states that have gone purple or blue start turning red again?
I'm glad you brought that up, because that was another priority when I decided to run 2 years ago that I'm proud of what we've delivered on. You look in our lifetime, because all three of us grew up right here in Utah County. I grew up in northern Utah. Well, we're all northern Utah County, right?
Yeah.
So we grew up here, and in our lifetime, we had a complete kind of red wall in the Intermountain West.
Right.
Nevada was, aside from Harry Reid, in our lifetime, but it leaned Republican otherwise. Even New Mexico is kind of 50-50, at times leaning Republican. Colorado leaning Republican. Arizona strongly Republican. What's happened?
Yeah.
What's happened? All four of those states have now gone blue, and they're leaning blue. Now, I think we can get some of that back, but I looked at that and it's like, this has to be a priority, because you can't just be like protectionist. You can't just worry about only your family. That can be your motivator. But if you're only worried about your family, you maybe miss the neighborhood. If you're only worried about your neighborhood, you maybe miss the state. Well, if you're only worried about Utah, a lot of the big national decisions, they'll still impact us. We have to win national races.
Yes.
We need Donald Trump in the White House rather than Kamala Harris. We need to make sure that in 2 years, well, a year and a half from now, that the House majority and the Senate majority are maintained by Republicans. So you have to be this force multiplier. So when I looked at that, it's like, what can we do as a party here in Utah, and what role can I play in helping win back the Intermountain West? And so put on the protection to make sure that nonsense of Utah flipping blue doesn't happen like it happened elsewhere. But then let's go and help those other states. It's why, we sent nearly 1,000 volunteers over the course of about a month. We did 2 big, large trips where we busted down volunteers to Arizona and Nevada. I went down, when we went to Arizona, I took my 2 oldest sons. We knocked doors. Phenomenal experience. But when I look at Donald Trump winning, like, could he have done it without us? Absolutely. But I'm glad that we were a part of that process. And I hope that we're just getting started at that, because I think that there's so much good in Utah. And while we're falling short of our potential, I'll take Utah over any other state. And let's keep working to meet our full potential. But let's also be that force multiplier in these other states. I would love to see Utah taking the lead and helping rescue Arizona and rescuing Nevada and rescuing Colorado and New Mexico. That's what I want to see. So in our lifetime, we've seen it go from one to the other. I'd say, and I challenge the two of you and anybody else that's listening to this, let's see it flip back in our lifetime.
Yeah.
Let's see those states flip back.
Flip back and help them reinstate their caucus system.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, and one thing that I keep coming back to with all of this is that you didn't go down there and say, "Hi, I'm going to politic you into helping us win." You just talk to people about truths that they care about, right? And that's the thing, is if we can just bring it back to that, the idea of the platform and the truths that we espouse, and then go fight for those. We're not asking you to go out and just be part of the team so that we can be the winning team. We're asking you to say, "Look, I agree with you on these ideas. We're going to go out and we're going to fight for those ideas, and we're going to go make a difference in the world based on these ideas."
Yep.
And then at the end of the day, hopefully we can get ourselves on God's side. I keep hearing people say, "Well, we got to get God on our side." No, that's not how it works. God works through truth. We have to get on his side. And if we can do that, that's where the needle really moves. And we may have to go through some tough stuff standing up for truth, but dang if it isn't worth it.
Yeah. Wholeheartedly agree to that. Wholeheartedly agree. And here's the nice thing. We all have something we can do.
Yeah.
So any Republican, 980 some odd thousand of us in the state, has something they can do. For some of us, it might be being in party leadership or being in a role in the party where you're giving your time. For others, it might be being a donor. It might be being a candidate. It might be knocking doors. Yep. It might just be that you're more willing to talk about it at church or to talk about it at the grocery store line. It might be that you're just going to be a little bit more educated when you cast your vote. But every single Republican has a chance to be a little bit more. And if we collectively do that, like, look out. Yeah. Look out for you and what we can do.
Yeah. That's awesome.
All right. Well, I'm going to call it. Thanks for coming, Rob.
Yeah. No, appreciate you, Chuck. Appreciate you, Cristy. And thank you, delegates. Look forward to seeing all of you May 17th. And reach out to me. I'd love to answer any questions that you may have and learn from each and every one of you. So thank you, guys.
Thanks.